Hello and welcome to our distinguished speakers, respective members of the judiciary, senior public servants and guests, colleagues of the legal profession, members of the public, the media and fellow lawyers and friends. I acknowledge that we are meeting today on many lands of traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to the land, waters and culture for over 65,000 years. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all other Aboriginal people joining us today for this virtual online national event. We're truly delighted that you have logged in for our first national summit. You are a powerful and historic audience. Registrations indicate that nearly 500 are tuning in today, some from overseas and some from other time zones quite different. We are appreciative that our summit is supported by event sponsors as follows: the College of Law, Baker McKenzie, TIMG, and by industry partners, Australian Bar Association of Queensland, Queensland Law Society of South Australia, and Victorian Bar. This year, 2020, has been a phenomenal series of events. We've had our largest bushfires in history, a global pandemic of disruptive lockdowns, the spectre of a looming USA election outcome. And we pay tribute to the passing of the great Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Difficulties and predictions for the future are not easy to guess. It is far easier to review our short history of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association. Going back 7 years ago, a small group, the brainchild of Raina Tang, commenced our activities under the guidance of the inaugural patron, Michael Kirby. A groundbreaking cultural diversity report was published in 2015. We followed with the launch of a scholarship in the honour of Mr. William Arquette of Wangaratta, the first Australian Chinese barrister. He was a formidable advocate against those discriminatory laws of those times, and a friend of Sir Robert Menzies and a member of Victorian Bar from 1903 for over 30 years. Last year, in 2019, the William Arquette Award ceremony was held at the High Court in Canberra, with the Chief Justice, the Honourable Susan Kiefel, giving a wonderful keynote and welcome to the epicentre of justice for our nation. When COVID turned up, we, like many, transitioned to digital events, and we connected more so at a level of member to member, using online portals, and learnt some of the benefits of this strange period we are exposed to. I acknowledge the work of the National Executive Committee and the state committees this year in adapting quickly and delivering programs relevant to membership. We strive to communicate to a wider audience with the addition of our university student outreach program. We have launched our member-to-member online business, work and social hub called the AALA Blackboard, which is live now for you to post comments and questions for today. A few months ago, we conducted our first national members survey, and we can now confidently say that we are better positioned to respond and cater for the needs and the expectations of our members. The content of today's program speaks for itself. It is both rich and varied, with extraordinary and exceptional legal minds, both locally and internationally. Cultural diversity is now a many-factored issue, and the guest speakers in each session aim to reflect that. And there is a certainty that AALA and other stakeholders will have plenty of work ahead of themselves after this summit finishes. We acknowledge the significant efforts to advance cultural diversity by individuals, firms, and industry in recent years. Despite this, we remain exposed against the headwind of institutional bias, and the advancement of inclusion still is a work in progress. This pandemic has caused a proliferation of different means of communication, meetings, and deliberation. And we too have become familiar to the flexible life-work arrangements. This has caused our world to experience a range of different risks and also to open up many opportunities and convergence as a family without borders. By the end of this, our 7th year, we will have in operation 7 state and territory branches, South Australia, ACT, and then Tasmania, all new. They are already organising at grassroots level to match the needs and the concerns of their local interests. And this is where the strength of our organisation lies. They are mandated and empowered to organise with flexibility with the help of our National Executive Committee. AALA will continue to provide a wide range of benefits to support members, and we will act more and more as your career partner to take you beyond the diversity doorway. We work with you to advocate and build cultural diversity advocacy and cultural intersectional opportunities in our journey ahead of us. This is reflected in our steady and increasing membership levels. Let it be known that cultural diversity is for everyone, making us all better lawyers and to be able to be the change that we want to see. I now hand the AALA National Summit control to the Summit Chair, Anand Shah, the Queensland Branch President, who coordinated the organising of this summit over the past 10 months. Anand has been elected by the Queensland Bar on many occasions to serve on its Bar Council, and he is also active in Law, Wright, LexisNexis Legal Conference Network, and particularly as a champion of socio-economically disadvantaged students. The organising committee, consisting of members of the national as well as the state executives, are truly pleased to deliver our national summit. Thought-provoking sessions layered with diverse celebrity performances. It's over to the chair, Anand Shah, and thank you.
Thanks very much, Kingsley, and hello to everyone, no matter where you're beaming in from. I'm delighted that I'm just about to be bookended by, might I say, the 2 gentlemen that had the vision to actually put this summit on. When COVID-19 hit, we were originally going to do an in-person conference. It was Kingsley and Matt Floro, who I'm just about to introduce, that had the vision to say that we could still do something. I'm confident to say that without their vision, this summit probably wouldn't have occurred. It's my pleasure to introduce you to the National Secretary of AALA, Matt Floro, and Matt's just going to take you through a few housekeeping matters. Over to you, Matt.
Hi, Anand. Good afternoon, all. Thank you so much for joining us at this historic summit, this National Cultural Diversity Summit 2020. I just want to take you through some of the features of Zoom. Most of you will be familiar with Zoom now, but it's useful just to run you through some of the basics. So if you're not already on mute, please just place yourself on mute so that we can hear from the speaker. And if you want to post any questions for any of the summit sessions, please log on to our AALA members Blackboard, which I will just post into the chat now. So if you log on to that site, you will be able to post any questions or feedback generally. You will be able to also post any questions or feedback for each of the 4 sessions. I'll just share my screen there so you can see that. So this is the Blackboard, and you can add any comments or questions in these boxes that I'm showing you now. Now, we'd also like to show you our website. You're very familiar with our website now, and if you're not a member already, please do join us by hovering your mouse over membership and click Join AALA. And you've also been given access to our full summit program. So that's about it. Make sure that you enjoy the conference, listen to our fantastic speakers, place yourself on mute, and any questions or comments, please pop them into the Blackboard. Thanks, Anand.
Thanks very much, Matt. As Matt just mentioned there, the full summit program will give you the detailed biographies of all the speakers and performers this afternoon. We won't have time to read out their full bios. It's my pleasure now to start the official program of this 2020 summit. And the title of the session 1 on your brochure is Being a Community Leader and Promoting Diversity. It's my pleasure to introduce your chair for that session, John Arthur. John has been a barrister at the Victorian Bar for 30 years now. John's principal area of practice is general commercial litigation. John is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. Not only that, but also the Australian Centre for International Commercial Arbitration. John is the current president of the Australian branch of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. John, over to you.
Thanks, Anand, for those kind words. As Anand said, the topic of our session, the first session, is the role of cultural leadership in the legal profession and the wider community. We'll explore this topic with 2 lawyers who have reached positions of leadership in the law. Firstly, Michael Kirby AO, and secondly, Judicial Registrar Nguyen Tran. Now, Michael Kirby clearly doesn't need an introduction. He is one of Australia's most senior and respected jurists, a High Court judge for 14 years until his retirement in 2009, and the President of the New South Wales Court of Appeal for 12 years prior to that. He has had many other judicial and public appointments and continues to make an enormous and valued contribution to Australian public life. Our second panelist for the first session is Judicial Registrar Nguyen Tran. Her Honour has been a Judicial Registrar of the County Court of Victoria since 2015. Nguyen signed the Victorian Bar Roll in 2002 and read with Pamela Tate, now Justice of Appeal Tate. Among her many achievements is a Bachelor of Civil Law from the University of Oxford. And in 6 days' time, Her Honour will become the first Vietnamese Australian judge of the County Court of Victoria, and join only 2 or 3 Asian Australian judges on that court, and one of that handful, only a handful of Asian Australian judges in Victoria, let alone Australia. Now, I'd ask each of the panelists to unmute themselves, and if I can firstly ask Michael, and the format of today will be that it'll be a Q&A session with a question directed to each panelist. Firstly, I'll ask Michael. Meanne will then give her answer to the question, or her response to the question. And then the next question I'll ask Meanne, and Michael will give his response. At the end of the session, there may be a short time for a Q&A from the audience. So if you have any questions, as Matt said, please type your questions into the chat function at the bottom of your screens. So if I can kick off the session with a question to Michael Kirby. Michael, you have been both, and you and Meanne Tran have both been successful in the law, obtaining positions of leadership. What are your secrets of success in the law? This is a three-pronged question. I hope you'll excuse me, Michael. Secondly, what hints would you give to young and up-and-coming lawyers? And thirdly, Michael, would your advice be any different if giving it to a culturally diverse young lawyer as opposed to one from an Anglo-Celtic or European background or Indigenous background? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming together on this occasion, and I thank you, John, for all the work you've put into preparing for this session. And above all, I want to thank and congratulate Meanne for being appointed from a very important position of Judicial Registrar to the County Court of Victoria, a distinguished and respected court in this nation. And like the High Court of Australia, Jack and Jill of all trades, we've just got to do everything. And I'm really thrilled that I'm sharing this platform with Meanne, who is a real example of what I was trying to do when I raised an issue, which was an issue that concerned me. And that issue was the issue presented by statistics. I've learned a lot of things over my long life, but the most important thing for the progress in human rights, equality and dignity is to found your strategies in strong data. And the strong data indicates that although something like 9.6% of Australians identify as being of Asian ethnic origin, the numbers that are getting into the big firms as partners, the numbers of barristers, the numbers of silks, and the numbers of the judiciary is very small, and that is not satisfactory and has to be changed. So that's what I think we should be trying to ensure, equal opportunity for all. Now, when I was growing up in the law, I had a big dark secret, and that was my sexuality. In those days, the deal was this: we will leave you alone and we will not use our criminal laws against you so long as you keep very, very quiet about your sexual orientation or gender identity. Keep it a big dark secret. And for a long time in my life, I kept it a secret. I played the deal. But actually, it was my partner, Johan, who's from the Netherlands, who said ultimately, look, how long do you think you're going to be alive? And how long are you going to be around? And your duty is to try to change things. This is ridiculous. Now, that was a difference coming from a cultural perspective. Johan is from the Netherlands. They're very difficult people, and they stand up for what they believe, and they're not like Anglo-Celts. They think, it's astonishing, they think that we are very polite, very nice, but very hypocritical. and we don't really say what we really think. Well, people from the Netherlands do. And so that led to my becoming much more open. And I think that was a good thing. Good for the High Court, good for the judiciary, good for the community, and good for other people in the law and in society. So how did I do it? I think there were two answers. First, I really worked my guts out. And second, I was a joiner. You've got to be a joiner. You can't just sit there in your own office hoping that the world will get to be a better place. You've got to be a joiner. So I joined the SRC. I became the president of everything. I chaired all the committees. I joined the Council for Civil Liberties. I joined everything I could that was aimed at changing what had to be changed. And I asked the questions and I took part in the activities. So that, I think, is a very important message, to be a joiner and not to slink back from getting involved and from stating your point of view. What advice would I give to young people? Well, I'd give advice to stand up. I mean, you can't deny the statistics. The statistics are not good, and we've got to help to change that. And I think rational people will see that. And would my advice be different for people of different ethnicities? Well, maybe there'd have to be adaptations. Some societies are very polite and rather deferential. For example, our Aboriginal community, people sometimes don't look the judge in the eyes. And there were a lot of people who thought, oh, well, that person's telling lies, because that was an Anglo-Celtic attitude. But so you can't just lay down to everybody. You've got to be pushy like Donald Trump, and you've got to go around being a person who is really aggressive and a bully. But to the extent that you can, I think it's very important for people from different ethnic communities not to be too backward in making the points that need to be made. But the fundamental principle in the law is you've got to be good at it. And how do you get good at it? You work your guts out. And you get in early, and you work hard on your brief, and you're hard on your documents. That was the way I used to deal with some very difficult judges, very difficult people. I never let them have a free kick. I was always on top of my material, and I still am. And I think if you're a hard-working lawyer, then I hope you will go ahead. And so I'm not sure that it would be different. You've got to adjust to your own cultural norms. But I do think it's important for people, Asian Australian lawyers, not to be embarrassed about raising the issues that AALA was founded to establish. The inappropriateness, the injustice, and the inequality of the representation of Asian Australians in the top echelons of our profession. So that'd be my best answer to those questions. Stand up for yourself, and don't be, as I was, keeping it all a big dark secret and pretending. I think we've all got to stand up for what is right and for equality and human dignity and justice. That's what lawyers are on about.
Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful advice for young lawyers and for all of us. Meanne, can I pose the same question to you? Good afternoon.
Thank you, John, and thank you for your introduction, and thank you very much, Michael, for your very kind words, and to everyone for taking the effort to be here today on a Saturday. I appreciate not everyone is in Melbourne and in lockdown with nothing better to do. I thought it was really interesting to hear what you said, Michael, about that need to keep the deep, dark secret, because part of what I think is really important now, we have all that data about all the disadvantages about being different. There's no doubt that there are incredible disadvantages in being different in the legal profession. One of the statistics that I see a lot is that idea that you have to put in 68% more CVs to even get an interview. I think many students from an Asian background would say, I only have to work 68% harder than your average white bloke. That's not really that hard. But I think it's also time to focus on the advantages of being different and to embrace our differences and be proud of our differences. Because there is no doubt that having greater diversity in positions of leadership in the judiciary improves the judiciary, improves the quality of the leadership that we get by bringing in fresh ideas, bringing in more creative ideas, bringing in fresh perspectives, and also improving the legitimacy of the organisation. Drawing on my own experience, I came to the bar very early in my career and was, going along very well with that. And then I got to a point in time where I had children and I decided that being at the bar was not consistent with being the mother that I wanted to be. I had a conflict of roles, basically. So even though I loved being a barrister, I made the decision to step away from the bar. And I really left the legal profession almost entirely for a period of 7 years. Then my kids were old enough and I was ready to go back to the profession, but didn't want to work full time. And it was interesting, I saw a little comment coming up in the chat, what about the people who don't want to work hard? Well, I think, John, having appeared in my court, you know that I always work incredibly hard. But for a period of my career, I worked incredibly hard 2 days a week as a judicial registrar, and probably 7 days a week, or the equivalent of about 10 days a week as a mother at the same time. I think that part of the reason why I was able to do that was I came from a perspective of difference. And I thought, I don't have to follow that path, that well-worn path that everybody follows. Maybe I can create my own path. Maybe there can be a diversity of experiences and backgrounds that feeds into things. And ultimately, I've gotten to that position of judge following that different path. And I think that's a good thing, and that's something that everybody needs to be standing up and embracing and being proud of, rather than viewing our difference as that deep, dark secret that has to be overcome.
Thank you, Meanne. That was for giving us your story and your path to where you've got to in your career. Can I ask, Meanne, while Australia is hailed as a true multicultural society, it has been reported that during COVID, Asian Australians have experienced heightened racism. Do Asian Australian lawyers face racism in their progress in the law? And if so, how can this be resolved and dealt with? And I'll ask you, and then I'll ask Michael the same question if I could. Thank you, Meanne.
Look, I can only speak from my own personal experience and from anecdotes that other people have told me. There is no doubt that there is a heightened level of racial tension, if you could call it that, at the moment due to COVID and due to the stress that everybody's under. From my own perspective, I've never been subject to what I would view as overt racism. But there's no doubt that there is unconscious bias that feeds into people's perceptions of me and of others from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds. That unconscious bias can come from the most well-meaning of people. To me, what makes a difference is just that incremental change of getting people into the positions of leadership, getting people into the speaking roles, making the faces that people see look more like mine and more like every other participant in this conference, and perhaps less like Rumpole of the Bailey at the end of the day.
Thank you, Leanne. Michael?
Well, as somebody who looks a bit like Rumpole of the Bailey and does also go around quoting English poetry and is sort of a bit eccentric in many respects. Obviously, I didn't have to face bias on the basis of my ethnicity, but it wouldn't be true to say that I never felt discrimination. I mean, I felt discrimination in having to hide an aspect of myself, my sexuality, and I had to put up with, at every level at which I worked, even in the High Court of Australia, colleagues who really ought to have known better, saying things which were frankly discriminatory against gay people, LGBT people. And I learned a very good lesson from a Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Louise Arbour. She taught it to me at a conference in Canada. She said, I never accept discrimination from court officers. I don't accept it from solicitors, I don't accept it from barristers, and I don't accept it from my judicial colleagues. And so we had a very clever, really supremely clever judge who sat with me in the Court of Appeal in New South Wales. And he used to say things like, oh, that sounds like a comment by a hairy-legged lesbian, or say things that were really discriminatory against women. And in the past, I'd been quiet about it, just hoping it would go away, but it wasn't going away. And so I remembered what Louise Arbour had said to me, and I said, His Honour does not, in that last comment, speak for the court, and he certainly doesn't speak for me. And I noticed when I did that once or twice, he stopped doing it. And I think really we have to stand up. It can be socially awkward, and maybe in some communities, and not just Aboriginal communities, maybe some Asian communities, it isn't regarded as appropriate to be confrontational. But sometimes, you know, where it's really serious discrimination, there's a need for a little bit of confrontation, and it can be done quietly but firmly, and it cured this very clever judge, and he stopped doing it. And so I think we've really got to be more willing in a firm but quiet and dignified but determined way to correct any instances we see that we're not comfortable with. And I do believe, I go to the rounds of at least the big firms, and they've all now got LGBT support groups. They've all got ways of expressing, bring your whole self to work. I mean, this is what it said in the LGBT. So you can work a change. Sadly, a lot of the pressure for that change came about by reason of the AIDS epidemic, and by reason of going out and reaching out to LGBT people who are in the front line. I have to say to this audience, you've got to be truthful. I would not be where I am now. I would not have become a judge of the Arbitration Commission, or of the Federal Court, or of the Court of Appeal, or the High Court of Australia if I had been open about my sexuality. There's no doubt I would not have made it. And so what we've got to do is make sure that those sorts of impediments are confronted and dealt with, and that we get allies, Nothing was ever achieved in gay rights just by gay people. It requires allies, and likewise in the area of ethnicity and prejudice and discrimination that is shown in these statistics, that really requires allies, people who are rational and who are fair, and look at these statistics and say, well, there's something wrong here, and we have to make sure that we correct that wrong.
Thank you, Michael. Can I ask you, Michael, if we assume that the numbers of Asian Australians or non-European Australians, or even non-Anglo-Celtic Australians in the population is not reflected in leadership positions in the law, is it important to have diversity in leadership positions in the law, and why?
Well, it is important, not only because we are supposed to be this great multicultural country, and certainly comparing this country to the country I grew up in denial of Aboriginal rights, in the White Australia policy, in real discrimination against women in the law, all of these things, there's definitely been improvements. And in little ways, I believe I have made a contribution to that. And all of us have to stretch our minds and think of how we can do that, how we can take advantage of the fact that Australia is this culturally, linguistically, religiously, socially, ethnically diverse country. Here we are, down here in the South Seas, in a sense, in a wrong geographical place in the world, but this is our big advantage. This is something we can really sell to the rest of the world. We have this multicultural society with a great opportunity, a generally safe and law-abiding and law-respecting country. And this is something which we can show to the rest of the world, and it's good for us in terms of our culture, but it's also good to us economically. And we've got to keep our eye on that, especially in the years when we'll be emerging from COVID-19. So I think we've made improvements, and that is really only going to be achieved by standing up for the values of a multicultural society and defending the principle of multiculturalism and not being ashamed of it, and confronting those who don't agree with it and saying, look, get real. This is who we are, and this is where we are in the world, and this happens to be a very big economic advantage for us, but we've got to handle it in an equitable way for all members of the community. And if that means making more appointments to silk, to judicial posts, to senior partners and so on, and keeping an eye on the statistics, then that is what we have to do.
Thank you, Michael. Meanne?
Look, I wholeheartedly agree, I think, with Michael. I've already talked about the benefits of increased perspective and creativity and new ideas that come from diversity. One of the other flip sides, I think, to increasing the diversity of our leadership roles and of our judiciary is also the community perception that flows on from that. The reality is that we live in a diverse world, and our courts, to use the words of my chief judge in the county court, ought to be the people's courts. They ought to reflect the diversity of the community with respect to which they judge. One of the great privileges of my current role, which I've only got for a few more days, is that I get to do judicial mediations as well as sit on the bench. And that means that I come down from the bench and I talk directly with the litigants who are experiencing our court system. You know, it's not an uncommon thing for people to tell me what it means to them to see someone like me sitting up on the bench. I remember specifically a little old Armenian lady, one of those amazing immigrants to this country, came due to circumstances with very little education, built up a business over many years and was having that business under threat by the civil litigation. And we were able to reach a resolution which meant the survival of her business. And at the end of that mediation, she gave me a cuddle and said to me, "I was cheering for you sitting up there on the bench because there was someone who looked like me." And that was so important to her. And I mean, I'm sitting there with my flamingos on my shirt and my big earrings and spiky hair, half Vietnamese, thinking, why do I look like a little old Armenian lady? But to her, I did, in a way that 90% of the judiciary probably doesn't. And she felt, as a result, that the courts were the people's courts, and this was a place where she could get justice. And I think that is a tremendously important reason why diversity in the judiciary and in roles of leadership in other areas of the community is so important.
Thank you, Mian. Can I ask you, Mian, what ideas do you have for Asian Australian lawyers and non-European, non-Anglo-Celtic lawyers to provide leadership and to give benefit to the legal profession and the community at large?
One of the things that I love doing and that I think is really important is mentoring. And that's something that, you know, everybody can do because there's always going to be somebody who is behind you that you can lift as you rise. And I think particularly for people who are coming to the law without a background in the law, that can be just such a valuable way to get that foothold, to make those connections, to get a start in the legal profession. So I would definitely say to everybody, if you don't have a mentee or two or three or four or five, why not? And what can you do to help others into the legal profession?
Thank you, Mian. Michael, what ideas do you have?
Well, I go back to the things that I started with. First of all, nobody's entitled to a free kick in this world. And it would set the cause of multiculturalism and equality and non-discrimination back if a person was appointed just because they were an Asian person or made a partner just because they were of a different ethnicity. I think it's really important that those who get the opportunities should be up to it and should be able to fulfill the work. And that means working very hard. And I'm afraid I don't think it's easy, certainly in the sort of jobs that I've had, to do those jobs if you're not willing to give heart and soul to them and to work really hard to succeed and to serve the community and to be worthy of serving the community. So I think that's a very important feature. And the other thing that I mentioned at the beginning is to be a joiner. And that doesn't only mean joining societies or bodies that are like-minded people. I mean, I'm bored going to LGBT functions. I've gone to so many of them and it gets a bit boring after a while. And I now think it's important to branch out and go to other groups, and for gays to be interested in feminism and into stopping the patriarchy that exists, which is not only anti-gay, but it's also against the multiplicity of attitudes to gender that exist in our society. And this is the key to it. If you don't realize from your own particular label of discrimination, that this is something hurtful and suppressive of talent of others who may not share your particular category of discrimination, but do share the discrimination. This is so-called intersectionality. We've got to learn that the discrimination it feels just as bad if it's on the basis of your Asian ethnicity. And boy, we had a lot of that in Australia in the time of white Australia and after, and possibly even today. So I think it's a matter of being willing to demonstrate that you are a top lawyer and a top performer. And that can only really come about if you work very hard on your work. And secondly, be a joiner and be involved and get involved in outside your particular circle. And thirdly, I think speaking up against the inequalities and injustices of this world and being willing to be a joiner and get involved in activities that confront these inequalities, like Liberty Victoria. You know, I do go along to some of the causes that I'm interested in, and I don't see many Asian Australians there. And that may be because they are not, they've got their own groups or they have strong cultural family groups and so on. But if you're going to get ahead in our world and in its public society, you've got to push yourself and get into these other groups and express your diversity in that context. So they would be the three things that I think should be done: working your guts out and joining and really learning from other people's discrimination and sharing your perspective and standing up for a rational response to leadership in our society.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now, we did have one further question. We're running a little bit over time, but a question from the audience. And perhaps I can ask Michael to lead off on this. We've heard that from what you and Leanne have said, that it takes great courage to come out and stand for rights and an incredible amount of work. But what about those who might not have the same great capacity for hard work that obviously you and Leanne have?
Well, that's a pretty fair question. And, you know, people say to me, well, you know, your work has always been, in a sense, your hobby. And therefore, you shouldn't complain about all your hard work because you love it. And that's what my partner says, you know. And if you were around all the time, you'd drive me mad. So I'm glad that you've got all these other things that are going on. And it's true, not everybody has that, and other people have very strong family obligations. I grew up with wonderful straight parents who were very committed to their children and very important in raising us with opportunity and with encouragement. So there are all sorts of things that it takes to make our world. But if you're talking about leadership, then you have to really be prepared to make a sacrifice. You can't just be a leader and with your feet up on the table. And I mean, we've had a few leaders like that, and they can be a menace. You've got to give more. And if you want to be a leader, then you've got to be prepared to give more. You've got to be a joiner. You've got to be a hard worker. You've got to interpret your situation for the rest of society. And then at the end of your life, you can look back and say, well, maybe I made a bit of a difference. And that's all any of us can do. You can get to the High Court of Australia, you can chair UN commissions and so on, but really in the big picture, it's not a big deal. But we all have to do what we can do to make the journey a bit easier in the future for those who come after us. And I've tried to do that because of my partner Johan for young gay people. And it was because of the unfairness to me growing up and the contempt and the hatred even in our legal profession and the top lawyers that I thought we should try to change this. And that's what made me sensitive to the statistics about the place of Asian Australians in the Australian legal profession. I looked at them and I didn't like what I saw. And that's why I stood up and spoke out, but not just about gay rights. I also spoke out about Asian ethnicity and discrimination and the aftermath of the White Australia policy. We've got to make sure this is dead and buried. And that means there have got to be Asian leaders in our politics, in our law, and in our churches, and in our society. And that's where you all come in.
Thank you, Michael, for your great words. Leanne, do you have any final comment in relation to that last question?
I suppose just to say that hard work, I think, doesn't necessarily mean 80-hour weeks. And it doesn't necessarily mean buying into a system that was set up in a time where pretty much everybody had a wife at home full-time looking after the family. Hard work to me means if you take on a task, no matter what that task is, you put everything into it and do your absolute utmost to do that task to your best of your ability. And I think that stands everybody in good stead, whatever your background and whatever your current situation, in terms of networking, in terms of moving forward, in terms of moving into those leadership roles.
Thank you, Leanne, and thank you, Michael, for your wonderful contributions to the first session. I think we know now that we have to join everything, go to everything, work hard, but perhaps not too hard, and keep the balance. Very many thanks to both of you for your wonderful contributions today in this session. I'll pass back to Anand.
Thank you very much, John. Lovely to hear from both of the judges at such a personal level. And I'm so pleased to hear Leanne mention mentoring. AALA actually has a very active mentoring program itself. If you'd like further details, please go to the website. Just before I introduce session 2, I should mention we are going to have about a 5-minute break around 2:45 Australian Eastern Standard Time. It's my pleasure now to start session 2, which is entitled Access to Justice as a Cultural Diversity Goal. I'm very pleased to introduce Matt Floro, who I mentioned before. Matt is our National Secretary of AALA. Matt is a senior solicitor advising on environmental planning, climate change and administrative law at the Environmental Defence Office, which is Australia's largest public interest environmental community legal centre. Matt has practiced environmental and planning law in Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales in the public, private and not-profit sectors. Matt's passionate, I know, about the community, and he has led Out for Australia Victoria, the Australian Law Students Association and his University Law Society. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks so much, Anand, for that warm introduction. And this session is very, very important. Access to justice as a cultural diversity goal. Justice Rangiah was appointed as a judge of the Federal Court of Australia in 2013. And His Honour also holds an appointment as an additional judge of the Supreme Court of the Australian Capital Territory. Prior to his appointment, Justice Rangiah practiced as a barrister at the Queensland Bar, taking silk in 2008. May Chen is the managing partner of Chen Palmer and adjunct professor at the University of Auckland Law School, director on the BNNZ board, chair of the Super Diversity Institute for Law, Policy and Business, New Zealand Asian Leaders and Super Diverse Women. May has appeared in almost 40 cases in the Supreme Court through to the District Court in New Zealand and specialises in administrative and constitutional law, human rights, employment law and regulatory defence. Access to justice as a cultural diversity goal is very important for all of us. As Anand said, I'm a lawyer at the Environmental Defender's Office and often myself get calls, inquiries from members of culturally and linguistically diverse communities. First off, I'd like to hand over to May Chen.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. Is that fine, Matt?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, May.
Very good. What I'd like to say is that I'm delighted to be speaking at the inaugural National Summit because access to justice is incredibly important. And when you start talking about cultural issues, people think of Brendan Tarrant. They think about the case in New Zealand that we had about the mosque shootings where 51 people were murdered and many, many more people were injured. And they think about Justice Manda, who is a Pākehā male judge, just doing an amazing job. You know, he shifted the trial so it didn't coincide with Ramadan. And he did a range of things which made us realise that cultural capability in our judges is important when you're dealing with so many victims from a very different religious and cultural background. But the impact and the issues and the challenges that arise from having a super diverse population, which we have in New Zealand, but you also have in Australia. So in Auckland, where I'm now practicing, I'm not there today, I'm actually in Nelson, but in Auckland where I practice, almost 50% of the population are Indigenous, Maori, Pacifica and Asian, and that's a very unusual combination, but Australia is the same. Super diversity means when 25% or more of the population were not born in the country. And I was not born in New Zealand, I was born in Taiwan and my family immigrated when I was at a young age. But the issues that it raises concern the assessment of evidence, the credibility of witnesses, the nature of legal relationships, the determination of mens rea, mitigating factors. What was the person remorseful, or is there a lack of remorse an aspect of big face? And so the impact from my study, which I did into culturally and linguistically diverse parties in the courts, which I published in 2019, shows that it is much harder to ensure access to justice for super diverse parties. They have unique issues that nobody else has. And what I discovered from doing the research, which was interviewing judges, so I focused on the senior courts. I asked judges if they'd like to be interviewed. They did. And so I was able to interview judges, interview Queen's Counsel, prosecutors, lawyers who advised super diverse clients and also super diverse lawyers. And what we discovered was that actually parties from China, Chinese parties from China, actually have the greatest difficulties in getting access to justice. Here are the reasons. One, communication. Obviously, English is not a first language. Secondly, major problems with interpreters. And if there's one major takeaway from the report, which has resulted and resonated, frankly, there is no qualification requirement. You can rock up with somebody and they can end up interpreting. There's a range of problems that I don't have time to talk to you about, but obviously, pre-trial process is incredibly important, as well as the fact that lawyers themselves, when they're acting for super diverse clients, need to highlight the issues early for judges, to be able to say to the judge, look, my client doesn't speak English, and in fact, even though they've been in New Zealand for 20 years, they've never spoken fluent English. In fact, in a recent case that I argued, which was white-collar defence, it was a breach of the AML legislation, I actually led expert evidence, which showed that despite the fact that the person had been in New Zealand for 30 years, their level of English was so low that actually they could never have registered for a degree or gone to tertiary study because their level of English simply wasn't enough. So when the officers came and raided the premises and said, look, we want to interview you and you have the right to self-incrimination, do you want an interpreter? She said no. I was able to bring evidence to make it clear that she had no idea what self-incrimination meant. In fact, she didn't know what it meant until I told her what it meant when she came to get advice. So we've got problems with interpreters, but we also have problems with translation. And as you know, one of the problems when you have the large number of Asian parties in the courts is that you have very little documentary evidence. A lot of business is done on handshakes, written on the back of napkins, and so the poor judge is trying to determine credibility. They're trying to figure out what's going on. Quite often what I'm being told by the Serious Fraud Office, by our prosecutors and also by the police, is that their difficulty now is just the very different sources of evidence when you are dealing with Asian clients. And obviously I'm generalizing, but I'm talking about the lack of ability of the police or the regulatory prosecutors simply to translate all of the WeChat messages into English so that the judge is able to see what they are. Obviously, the difficulty here also for judges, now we in New Zealand only have one Asian judge in our district court currently. We've had previously 2 Chinese judges in our district court. We have no Asian judges in the High Court and above. So, and we are in the 21st century and it is 2020. So, of course, we have an issue here with judges understanding parties' actions, motivations, and the issue I found when I was invited to speak to the Institute of Judicial Studies here, and after I published a report to all of the High Court judges in Auckland, is that often they would say to me, well, it was very curious. They did this funny thing. So, for example, a judge, I was reading a case, and so the judge was confronted with a situation where a wife had murdered the wife had assaulted the husband, but the judge decided that there was no mitigation here because there was no remorse shown. The reason was because she had said that she felt apologetic, but she'd said it through her husband. The judge noted that had she really been serious, she would have said that directly to the judge. But of course, those of us who come from Asian societies, and particularly Asian women like me, understand that given the country that I was born in, we used to play a game where, you know, the caller would say $3 and, you know, boys would be worth $1 and girls would be worth 50 cents. It was clear to me that the wife had said sorry through her husband because she wanted to show the judge that she was really serious. In commercial disputes, we have a real reluctance between Chinese parties, Asian parties to settle. A lot of that has to do with big face. There are problems determining the nature of trust claims because, of course, particularly when you've got a situation of parents dealing with land or monies to their children, it's very different if they're giving money to a son as opposed to giving money to a daughter. In criminal cases, as I've said, there are real issues with remorse, which is mitigation, but also demeanour and the meaning of body language. When we had a judge of the Court of Appeal who joined me in training lawyers at the start of this year before COVID struck, she pointed out, this was Justice Courtney, that we really need to say to ourselves, if judges are having difficulties understanding demeanour, culture, and the impact of that on mens rea and all of these other issues, credibility, then how do juries assess credibility? Because if judges are having problems, then certainly juries will have more problems. And then, of course, there is the whole issue of vulnerability and the fact that super diverse parties who are victims of intimate partner violence tend to be much more vulnerable. Why? They don't speak English, they don't know how to navigate systems, they don't know about refugees, government agencies, they don't know how to deal with police, and sometimes they face racism, xenophobia, and language barriers. And of course, there is the failure to understand the rule of law. If you come from a very different rule of law background in an Asian country, it may be that there is no separation of powers. The judiciary is not independent. And we've had a very interesting and important case here in New Zealand recently, written by our Chief Justice Helen Wing-Kalman, which it was an extradition case, but she actually had to analyse the Chinese culture in China in detail to conclude that in that particular jurisdiction, there was not the rule of law as we knew it, and therefore that had ramifications for the particular case. So there are also issues with jury service in New Zealand. We, despite the fact that in Auckland, almost 1 in 3 in our Asian, they get called for jury service, but they almost always say they can't serve. They're too busy, their English is no good. And so you end up not being judged by a jury of your peers, but that is mainly because if they come from countries with no jury system or no rule of law like ours, they don't understand the significance of jury service. And then we also have a difficult issue in New Zealand with self-representation. So we have super diverse parties on both sides, nightmare for the judge, self-representation, they don't speak English. And so one of the reasons why 5 senior court judges joined me to present to lawyers in New Zealand was simply to say that it doesn't matter if your client doesn't want to hear it, but you have an obligation as counsel to ensure that your clients understand the importance of settlement, and that big face is all very well, but the reality is that if the dispute is over 20,000, then why on earth are you in the High Court? Why are you not settling the matter as opposed to both getting lawyers and going at it? And then, of course, when I interviewed the Asian lawyers in New Zealand, what they found was that there were very real issues faced in court. There was one particular Chinese lawyer who said that she was actually there representing the Pākehā party, but there was a Chinese party on the other side represented by a European lawyer. And the judge kept saying to her, you know, why is the Chinese person in the box doing this? To which she continually responded to the judge, I'm sorry, sir, I wouldn't know, he's not my client. And so there do continue to be issues. In terms of legal counsel, remember, it's your job to put the case for your client. You need to be proactive. You need to raise issues early. And if you need expert evidence to explain to the judge why your client has done something that looks really odd in Australian or New Zealand culture, then you have to get and depose that evidence. If you don't do it, the judge is not going to know. They don't come from an Asian background. They're not specialists in Chinese or any other Asian culture. On top of that, it is not the interpreter's job to provide cultural guidance to the judge. That is not what they're there to do. They're there to interpret. And of course, the impact on the judge is that judges in New Zealand are now trying to devise mechanisms to overcome barriers to ensure equal access to justice for parties that are super diverse and that are Asian or were not born in the country. So I identified cases over the last 10 years. I systematically analysed and pulled out 120 of the cases where the super diversity of the parties really had an impact. And some of those cases were fabulous because the judges had deposed mechanisms which really made it, helped to overcome the access to justice issues. So, of course, CQ training, the Institute of Judicial Studies has started running training, and judges have found it incredibly helpful to be able to say, well, gosh, okay, now I understand that actually when I got all of these young men up on drug charges, and as you know, in China, pseudoephedrine is not illegal. In New Zealand, it is. So we've had a wave of usually young Asian men through our criminal courts, and judges just saying that they're dismayed because so many of them are going to prison. They're not showing remorse, and simply putting to them that there might be a different explanation, that they might be remorseful, but because of big face and not wanting to shame their families. We had one particular defendant who was offered home detention by the judge. He refused because he thought if he refused, then the judge would have to let him go. The judge then had to explain to him that if he didn't take home detention, he was going to jail. And so these are the issues. Also, if you are going to have super diverse parties in the court, then courts are going to need more time. Having an interpreter, having translation is just going to slow the trial down, and there's nothing worse than being in a case which is part heard. So look, I've made many recommendations, whether they relate to funding cultural reports for judges. We have a mechanism, but it's only in criminal law, enhanced pretrial access process, directions to juries. What I'm told by the prosecutors is that there's a lot of bias and racism on juries, because if it's a Chinese or an Asian defendant, needing a translator, which means that the jurors end up being there twice as long, they take it out on the defendant. And of course, interpretation and translation service. In New Zealand, we need a complete overhaul of our system. Your system is a little bit better, but there are some real problems with qualifications not getting adequately paid, not getting materials to properly prepare, not having a place to stand in the court, not having somewhere to shelter during the breaks so that the parties can't get to them. In New Zealand also we have an issue because criminal interpreters for criminal cases are paid for by the Crown, but in civil cases you're on your own. So if I have a civil case, I have to go out and pay. The client has to pay for an interpreter, and it's really difficult to explain to the client that the interpreter is not working for them, that the interpreter is there to assist the court and to assist the judge. So quite often you can see that there's, the interpreter is supposed to be interpreting, but actually the deponent is saying, well, I don't know, what is the judge saying? What do you think I should answer? And sometimes there's a little bit too much discussion going on that shouldn't be going on. But we need to be clear with interpreters that they're there and they're independent. So look, in conclusion, I did a study. It was published in 2019. I've now received a further batch of cases from the Ministry of Justice, which have been through the judges, so they have approved them to be released to me. We'll be identifying cases over the last 12 months where there have been super diverse parties on one or either side that has had an impact. And of course, I took the soft option. I went to the senior courts because I knew that the issues would be much less there than if I went to the district court, the family court, the youth court, the drug court, and of course the employment court. I was asked to speak to the Employment Relations Authority in New Zealand. Over 60% of their parties are super diverse and do not speak English as a first language. So these issues that we are having a discussion about are important for us, but they're also very important for ensuring that we have a court system that actually ensures that there is true access to justice for all parties. Thank you.
Thanks very much, May. Before I hand over to Justice Rangiah, thank you. We've been getting some questions on the blackboard. I've got 3 questions ready to go once Justice Rangiah has spoken. Keep on having that discussion on the blackboard. We're using that as a platform, not only for this summit, but also going forward. Justice Rangiah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm sorry to be so casually dressed compared to the other speakers, but I'm at the Gold Coast and I'm not sure that I'm even allowed to wear a suit at the Gold Coast. But, now, it is a fundamental principle in Australia that no person should be disadvantaged in their ability to access and use our justice system by reason of their sex, religion, language, or racial origin. The sheer diversity of the Australian population makes equal access to justice very challenging. However, that challenge does not mean that more cannot and should not be done to improve the quality of justice in Australia. When we consider the equality of access to justice, I agree with May that the starting point is not the type of commercial disputes that we regularly see in the federal court, the Supreme Courts, and the district court. The starting point must be the magistrates' courts and the tribunals where about 90% of the people who encounter our justice system will appear. The issues that the magistrates' court or local courts and tribunals tend to encounter are those which affect the most fundamental parts of people's lives. Areas like criminal charges, domestic violence, and the right to live in Australia. There are two aspects of access to justice that I want to briefly speak about. The first is communication, and the second is access to information. Now, language is the greatest barrier faced by people from non-English speaking background who use the court system. There is not only the difficulty that they face with speaking and understanding ordinary English, but also with the technical form of English that is used by courts and tribunals. Interpreters are most commonly used in Australia in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal migration jurisdiction and in the Magistrates Court in various jurisdictions that I'll mention. The sheer number of litigants and the diversity of languages creates real difficulties in finding adequate numbers of competent interpreters with sufficient knowledge of court processes. As May said, we have NATI in Australia, which is the certifying authority for interpreters. Courts prefer interpreters trained to the NATI professional standard and prefer interpreters in person, but that is not always possible. Particularly in the Magistrates Court, often it's necessary to use unqualified interpreters, including through commercial interpretation services who may not be NATI qualified. It's simply a case that the high volume of people coming through courts and tribunals like the Magistrates Court cannot and do not have access to sufficiently qualified interpreters in all cases. This can give rise to many problems. Justice Perry, who's on my court, gives an example of a phrase that lawyers are familiar with. So let's take something like execution of a warrant. But you can imagine the consternation and alarm that might cause through an inaccurate interpretation of that phrase. Now, the second area I wanted to talk about is access to information, and I'll make three brief points about this. Firstly, a person coming into contact with the justice system for the first time, especially if they cannot afford a lawyer or are ineligible for legal aid, is at a great disadvantage by lack of access to information about the processes of the court if that person comes from a non-English speaking background. It's one thing to come into that situation when you're familiar with English, but if you're not, it's a completely different and more daunting process. The second point I want to make is that access to justice doesn't start with the judicial system itself. Access to justice starts far earlier than that in terms of contact with police and other authorities, for example. So there are non-judicial aspects of the judicial system, or of the justice system, and as well as courts, which offer a range of services, including support workers, domestic violence shelters, and the like. But access to these aspects of the justice system requires access to adequate information and the provision of that information. I have strong concerns about the adequacy of the communication of information about the most basic aspects of the justice system to people from non-English speaking backgrounds. The third point I wanted to raise is about cultural issues. I have to say that my information about this aspect comes to some extent from my partner, who's a magistrate, but she tells me that often in domestic violence cases, you have men appearing who don't seem to really understand that there are different cultural norms and standards in Australia. It's an area that I feel strongly about, that is that there has to be adequate counselling and assistance for men who perpetrate domestic violence, as well as the women who are the victims of domestic violence. But again, it seems to me that this is an issue of access to justice. The Judicial Council for Cultural Diversity in Australia has written about a number of these issues, but I fear that not enough attention has been paid to them by government. In an increasingly diverse Australian society, the provision of a fair and equal system of justice demands that more attention should be given to these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice Rangiah. And we do need to wrap up the session in a few minutes, but I just post one question to both of you very quickly based on the questions that have come out of the Padlet. So the Padlet asks, how can courts more effectively take into consideration ethno-linguistic background and in terms of expert evidence particularly, and sometimes words lose some of their meaning through interpretation. How can these issues be addressed? Actually, we might start with you, Justice Rangiah, and then finish with Mei Chen on that question. Thank you.
Difficult question to answer, and all I can think of is that it requires resources. One of the difficulties for courts is that, for example, the use of an interpreter takes up time. And particularly with high volume courts, there is no time. So all that I can think of in that respect is more judicial resources and more competent interpreters, but how that can be achieved, I just don't know. I think that's about the best answer that I can give.
Not a problem. Thank you, Judge. Certainly a very vexed question. Mei Chen to close us.
Thank you. So in terms of expert evidence, what I find is that it's helpful for the judge to understand whether or not your particular deponent understood what they were doing, and therefore the sort of expert evidence I bring explains a particular culture and therefore tries to context my client's behaviour to explain what it really means, because otherwise judges will bring their own cultural context to it to try and understand, because at the end of the day they're the ones who have to make the findings on credibility, and that's incredibly difficult, particularly when there is a dearth of contemporaneous documentary evidence. That's in the civil sphere. In the criminal sphere in New Zealand, we have an ability to seek cultural reports. But maybe that's something that we need to think about, that just as we provide interpreters, we also need to provide cultural advisors for judges. Often the interpreters that I interviewed complained because they said quite often they were felt pressured by the judges to provide cultural advice. And, you know, that's not what they're there to do. I close by simply saying this. I wrote this because it was clear to me that all of these issues were happening anyway, and they were invisible. And I think the most important thing that we have to do, particularly as super diverse lawyers and judges and people in the court system, is to try and give visibility to things that are otherwise invisible. If you put a super diversity framework on the courts, on parties, on the law, on legal education, on mediation, what you will find is a whole bunch of issues and challenges that otherwise are invisible. And in Auckland now, in New Zealand now, and certainly in Australia, because we are similarly super diverse, we just can't afford to do that anymore. Because if we do, frankly, for us in Auckland, our court system wasn't running properly. I mean, we had so many parties that didn't speak English that I just felt that the judges were just saying, well, hang on, we didn't sign up for this. You know, this is not an inquisitorial process, it's an adversarial process. We've got people here who are not behaving as they should in an adversarial process because they don't even know what it is. So I don't think we can delay. Look, the work that I did is a start. You've got Andrew Godwin online, Professor Andrew Godwin. You've also got Professor Sarah Bidoff. Both of them work in this area. I also saw Dr. Ruping Yi online. I saw Ming Foon, who's the New Zealand Race Relations Commissioner. There is a little bit of work being done in this area. It's only just started. It's an issue worldwide. There are so many super diverse countries in the world. And so it's great that you're having this conference. You're putting a spotlight on it. The work that I did was just a start. All it did was elicit the fact that there were so many issues, but it wasn't based on anecdote. It was based on substantive evidence from analysing court cases. And that's what we need, evidence-based research here to ensure that we are giving visibility to barriers to access to justice, without which you cannot overcome them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, May. And we encourage all of you to download her report at superdiversity.org. This is the beginning of a conversation in Australia, drawing on May's research. So we hope to work on that with you, May, over the coming months and next year. Very good. Thank you very much. And back to Anand. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt. Lovely to see Justice Rangiah in his civvies there, and also lovely to hear that beautiful Kiwi twang in May's voice. Thank you very much, Matt. Cooking, comedy and music help us learn about and enjoy different cultures. I'm pleased to say that all three are on offer for you this afternoon. Cooking's first up. I'd like to introduce to you Moni Storz. Moni is the founder and owner of the Singing Wok Malaysian restaurant cookery school in Melbourne. The Singing Wok brings together Chinese and Malay cuisines. Moni had a very different life earlier on. She was an academic sociologist, interestingly enough, talking about cultural diversity for many, many years at a university, and she holds a doctorate in sociology. Over to you, Moni.
Oh, when it comes to spotlight to everyone, would you like to unmute your microphone to speak? Yes, I do. Okay, guys, this is a virgin event session for me. I have never done a Zoom presentation, although I've spoken to many people like yourselves who at this time of the day are probably brain dead. So I'm the comic relief. I was briefed by Kingsley, and prior to him, I was invited by Molina. So I thank Molina, this young, beautiful girl. Anyone under 60 is a girl to me because I'm very, very old. Now, I've got a time freak, so I'm going to put myself on a timer. Just bear with me. I'm going to disappear, and I'll come back and show you a dish that is so amazing, you can't eat it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I put myself on 7 little minutes, and this will only take 2 minutes to cook and 1 minute to eat. Okay, as I said, I've been given the brief as a comic relief to come in to demonstrate this noodle dish for you. It's called Hokkien cha. And cha means fry in the Hokkien dialect. As most of you know, there are many dialects in Chinese, and Mandarin is the official language. So Hokkien actually was the imperial dialect during the Tang dynasty. Okay, kids. You know, all of you kids, I was even listening to a previous speaker whose name I didn't catch, and even though his hair was a little bit gray, I bet I'm older than him because I'm close to 80 years old. And you know what, kids? When a woman tells you her age, she can tell you anything. Yeah, Oscar Wilde. Okay, guys, this is the wok. Now, the dear old Kingsley even wanted me to sing. Hello? I'm not being paid for this job, you know. So this is the wok. And you probably wanted to know why the singing walk. So years ago, when I started the Australian Centre for Chinese Studies, one of the branches was a theatre cafe, and I've always wanted to combine music with cooking because both are universal likes or loves. It doesn't matter what color you are, wherever you are, if you can sing in any language and give some people, foreigners, if we're talking about foreigners when we're traveling, or when I was traveling, then you give them a dish to eat, they immediately bond with you, right? Okay, so Hokkien cha, this little dish has a story. But before I go into the story, let me demonstrate. The oil, most of you know how to cook, right? Even the boys know how to cook these days. Thanks to us, mothers in the 60s, we make sure that our boys know how to cook. Now kids, so you can hear the sizzling pan. Next to go in is the garlic, but don't leave it too long, okay? Now Hokkien cha is distinctively a dish, as I said, that come from the Hokkien people. So with the Chinese, you usually use pork. We love our pork, but today I'm talking to a global audience. So there might be Muslims among you. So to honor you, to honor diversity, I'm using lamb. And of course, some Chinese say, lamb, we don't like lamb. Tough titties, kids, because we are going to try and be very diverse and at the same time inclusive. Now prawns is the next dish. These are the important dish that has to have the sea, the land, and you know what we say about Chinese. Anything that has legs on land, the sea, and the sky, we will eat it. Okay, so I can't show you the actual wok, but why do you want to look at the wok when you can look at me, hey? So these are the proteins that has to be cooked first. And now my little children, Auntie Moni will show you the long life noodle. You see, when the Chinese have an important event, we usually make this dish called Hokkien cha, right? You see, because this noodle symbolizes long life. And so we do this and we dance with it. Rasa sayang, hey, rasa sayang, sayang, hey, hey, lihat nyonya jauh. Rasa sayang, sayang, hey. I am waiting for the noodles to get cooked. So while I'm waiting, I sang you a Malay song. So all the Malaysians in the audience will know this song because we do the dance, remember? Maybe the younger ones don't remember, but people like Kingsley might, because we are more or less in the same age group. So here we are. We have this lovely look, glistening Hokkien cha. This is my favorite dish actually. It makes me think of my mom. Every Chinese New Year, after we've prayed to the gods and goddesses and their ancestors, we children just love this dish because it's noodles, yeah? So what else can I do to entertain you guys? Do a striptease show? Nah. Now, a dish is only good if it has many colors, like us Asians, yeah? And, oh, by the way, all the white boys and girls in the audience, white is also a color. We don't mind you around. Yeah, we don't mind you around. But because after all, you brought English language to British Malaya, French to Vietnam, and I won't say the word American to the Philippines. Okay, we won't mention the USA today. So there we are. We are almost done. We probably don't even need 5 minutes. Oh, we got 1 more minute to go, my children. So the last to go is the bean shoots. And you can see that this dish is excellent for children because it's a meal in itself. It's got proteins, it's got vegetables, it's got prawns, it's got, well, lamb. Now, I need to have a drink. Now, I usually would drink in a little glass like that. But today, I have been so stressed out by the technology. Yeah? So, I wish all you young and old lawyers, okay? I will get so drunk and I drink to your health. Woohoo! What did I put on? 7 minutes? Oh, I better get going. So you put in the green stuff, and a good cook is always a neat cook. Like the noise, you know, everybody said I have got such a loud voice. So it's all done. Let me turn on the I'm going to be so famous after this, right? All you young and old lawyers will just make me so famous. This is plenty of fame, no money session, but I'm sure I can employ a few lawyers to sue for some money for this dish. Now, guys, this is the dish. I'll show you in a minute. You now have garnish. Without this, it ain't a Hokkien cha. So you put some Kaey into it, the green. You put egg omelette or chop up. Dry shallots. I bet you're hungry, right, guys? I bet you're hungry. I can send you a digital dish. And being a Malaysian Chinese dish, you can't eat anything without the hot chilies. So you have a bit of red, and you have what is known as sambal belacan. Belacan is like a shrimp paste and lime, but I couldn't find lime this morning, so I used lemon. So, but you don't have to put it because it's really hot. It's really hot like when I was 16 years old and still a virgin. Okay, guys, this is the dish. Can you, all of you see this? Put up your hands when you can. Yeah? So my session has now come to an end. I've sung you a Malay song. And now I will end up by singing a very famous Chinese song. If there are any Chinese in there, in your audience, you'll know this song. Ni wen wai ni yo tuo sen. Okay, that's it, guys. I love you all. Sometime, somewhere. And Lord Buddha blessings. Bye-bye. I'm going to eat this.
Thanks very much, Moni, future celebrity chef, no doubt. Moni, there's many messages coming through of people getting too hungry at the moment. Thank you so much for making it so much fun for us as lawyers. We need all the fun we can get. Thank you so much, Moni. Please wait until dinner to try Moni's dish. We're only going to have a break now for 5 minutes, if we might. And if we could please resume at about 10 to 3 Australian Eastern Standard Time. Could I please ask you as well to keep your Zoom link live? Do not shut it off. Of course, you can mute yourself and stop the video, but please keep your link going. And I'm very much looking forward to introducing to you session 3 in about 5 minutes' time. So I look forward to you coming back then. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to commence session 3 of the summit. And it's my pleasure to introduce my esteemed colleague, Belinda Wong. I'm beaming into you from Brisbane. Belinda's sitting around 4,300 kilometres away from me to the west of where I am, over in Perth. Belinda's session is entitled Model for Judicial Diversity, the Need for Cultural Diversity. Belinda is a Senior Associate at Cause Chambers Westgarth, practising in the areas of construction and major project disputes. She has many years' experience acting for multinational and national entities in a range of disputes, including complex international and local arbitrations, large-scale litigation, adjudications, and mediations. Over to you, Belinda.
Thanks, Anand. I'm also the president of the WA chapter of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association. So if you're interested in joining up in WA, let me know. So let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of various lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We'll be treated to some extraordinary speakers for session 3. In order of appearance, Lord Justice Rabinder Singh of the English Court of Appeal and President of the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, Chief Justice Tani Cantil-Sakauye of the Supreme Court of California, and Pauline Wright, President of the Law Council of Australia. Due to time differences, their sessions have been pre-recorded. They need no introduction, but I will be providing a brief preamble of their achievements before each recording. The question that our eminent speakers have been tasked with answering today, and the one that we in the Australian community must grapple with, is how to ensure that the process of judicial appointments results in a bench that reflects our diverse and evolving Australian community. It has been observed, including by Justice McHugh of the High Court, that a socially and culturally representative court can increase public confidence in the impartiality of the institution. As a paper by Simon Evans and John Williams, Appointing Australian Judges, a New Model, states, measured in historical and international terms, the Australian judiciary is acknowledged to be of outstanding quality and has enjoyed the public's confidence. Nonetheless, it should be remembered that the current system is itself a product of reform and adaptation. So we'll find out how the issue has been approached in the UK and USA, and then what reform and adaptation might be recommended here in Australia. First up, the Right Honourable Sir Rabinder Singh read law at Trinity College, Cambridge, was a Harkness Fellow at the University of California at Berkeley before being called to the bar at Lincoln's Inn in 1989. He was appointed a High Court judge in the Queen's Bench Division in 2011 and was presiding judge of the South-Eastern Circuit from 2013 to 2016 and the Administrative Court Liaison Judge for the Midland, Wales and Western Circuits during 2017. He was appointed a Lord Justice of Appeal in October 2017 and President of the Investigatory Powers Tribunal in September 2018. I'm now very excited to present Lord Justice Singh's comments.
I am grateful to you for inviting me to speak at your conference this year. I'm sorry that the difference in time zones means that it is not possible for me to take part in your conference live. By way of introduction, I have been asked to give a short description of my journey to the bench. My family was originally from the Lahore area. They moved to Delhi after partition and migrated to the UK in the 1960s when I was a small child. I grew up in Bristol, where I went to Bristol Grammar School. I studied law at Trinity College, Cambridge in the early 1980s. I then did a master's in law at the University of California at Berkeley. After returning to the UK, my longer term aim was to become a barrister, but I became a lecturer in law at the University of Nottingham for 2 years. After that, I came to London and studied for the bar and did my pupillage. I then practiced as a barrister between 1990 and 2011, becoming a QC in 2002. I specialized in public law, human rights, and employment law. Much of my work was on behalf of the UK government both in domestic courts and in the European Court of Human Rights and the Court of Justice of the European Union. I also did many cases on behalf of individuals and NGOs, such as Liberty, which is the National Council for Civil Liberties. Before the Constitutional Reform Act 2005, judicial appointments were made by the Lord Chancellor, acting on the advice of his civil servants. Some appointments were made by the old-fashioned method known as the tap on the shoulder. However, by 2005, there was already a well-developed system for at least some appointments to be made by application in competitions which were administered by the Lord Chancellor's department. For example, I was appointed a recorder of the Crown Court, which is a part-time judicial appointment, in 2004, after an open competition conducted by the Lord Chancellor's department. However, I was also appointed a Deputy High Court judge in the old-fashioned way, after a telephone call came on behalf of the Lord Chancellor, out of the blue. In this jurisdiction, it is the norm that judges gain some experience in a part-time capacity, sitting for a few weeks a year, while they continue in practice before appointment as a full-time judge. By the time I became a full High Court judge in 2011, the appointment system in England and Wales had changed radically. As a result of the 2005 Act, all judicial appointments are made on the recommendation of the Judicial Appointments Commission. There is an open competition, depending on when vacancies are expected to arise, but usually once a year. One of the criteria used for appointment is an ability to understand the needs of the diverse communities which judges have to serve in our society. Having given you that brief introduction, I would like to address three topics today. The first is what judges do, and in particular, what I do as a judge. The second is the importance of diversity in the judiciary. The third is the role played by the Judicial Appointments Commission, or JAC, in England and Wales, which I understand may be considered as a possible model for Australia also. Let me start with what I do as a judge. It is truly an honour to serve the public as a judge. We are entrusted with power on behalf of the public, which we must exercise fairly and impartially. When appointed, every judge takes an oath of office or makes an affirmation to do right to all manner of people without fear or favour, affection or ill will. Judges have the power to send people to prison, sometimes for very long periods of time, including life imprisonment. We have the power to separate families, for example, when deciding where and with whom children should live. We adjudicate on civil disputes, which can have great significance for the livelihood of an individual or a business. We also decide on disputes between the individual and the state, including in certain circumstances the acts of the legislature. For example, under the UK's Human Rights Act, the senior courts have the power to make a declaration of incompatibility, that is, to declare that an Act of Parliament is incompatible with fundamental human rights. While this does not strike down the legislation, in practice, Parliament has responded to such declarations by amending or repealing the incompatible legislation. Judges therefore stand as a safeguard between the rights of the individual and the potential abuse of power by state agencies. I myself am honoured to be a judge of the Court of Appeal of England and Wales. Previously, I was a judge of the High Court, sitting in the Queen's Bench Division. In that capacity, I presided over both criminal and civil trials, including trials with a jury, dealing with some of the most serious offences, in particular, murder. I had the privilege of sitting at the Central Criminal Court in London, which is usually called the Old Bailey, and on the top of which is the famous statue of Justice. Now that I am a Lord Justice of Appeal, I sit in both civil and criminal appeals. We usually sit in a panel of 3 judges. Often we are deciding points of law. We are in fact the most senior court in England and Wales. Some of our decisions, a small percentage, are appealed further to the highest court in the UK, that is the Supreme Court. This imposes a great responsibility on us, as often decisions of the Court of Appeal will settle what the law is for years to come, and according to which many people will regulate their affairs for the future. I am also president of the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, which is an independent court in the UK which considers complaints, for example, of a breach of human rights by the intelligence agencies. This is, for obvious reasons, very important work, calling as it does for a balance to be struck between the rights of the individual, including privacy rights, and the demands of national security. My second topic today is the importance of diversity in the judiciary. I would suggest that diversity is important for at least 3 reasons. The first is fairness to individuals who wish to become judges. In a society which is committed to equality, we believe that each individual should be considered for appointment on their merits and not by reference to some irrelevant categorization in a group defined by, for example, race or gender. The second reason is the societal benefits which flow from having a diverse bench. This is particularly true of a multi-member court. It has frequently been said by judges around the world that they benefit from having colleagues from diverse backgrounds. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The third point was best described, I think, by Lady Hale, who recently retired as President of the UK Supreme Court. In a lecture she gave in 2000, she referred to the importance of diversity to underline the legitimacy of the judiciary as a public institution. She said, I quote, "This matters because democracy matters. The judiciary may or should be independent of government and parliament, but ultimately we are the link between them both and the people. We are the instrument by which the will of parliament and government is enforced upon the people." In the same lecture, she said, "In a democratic society in which we are all equal citizens, it is wrong in principle for that authority to be wielded by such a very unrepresentative section of the population." I turn to the role played by the Judicial Appointments Commission in England and Wales. This was created by the Constitutional Reform Act 2005 and replaced the former system by which the Lord Chancellor's Department conducted the process for the appointment of judges. As I have said, sometimes that process was known as the tap on the shoulder. There are similar appointment commissions in Scotland and Northern Ireland. When a vacancy arises in the UK Supreme Court, there is a procedure for appointing those judges, which includes representatives of the appointment commissions of the different nations of the UK. Strictly speaking, the JAC does not make judicial appointments. It does, however, make recommendations to the Lord Chancellor. Some appointments further require the recommendation of the Prime Minister, for example, appointments to the Court of Appeal. The Prime Minister then advises Her Majesty the Queen, who of course finally makes the appointment itself by granting a judge letters patent. The system that has been adopted in England and Wales does not involve the making of more than one recommendation by the JAC for each vacancy. That does not mean that the Lord Chancellor has to accept the recommendation. He can reject a recommendation, but what the Lord Chancellor cannot do is to select different candidates. In the rare event that a recommendation is not accepted, the JAC can then be asked to consider an appointment further. By statute, the JAC must have regard to the need to encourage diversity in the range of persons available for selection for appointment as judges. It is important to emphasize what this does not mean. It does not mean that they are required or even permitted to engage in positive discrimination or affirmative action. Generally, in our law, affirmative action is unlawful. By law, judges must be appointed on merit alone. In some cases, where there is a strict tie between two applicants, they are permitted by law to use what is known as a tiebreaker provision. They can then select a candidate from an underrepresented group. I am told that the tiebreaker provision is used occasionally, but not very often. In terms of the ethnic diversity of the judiciary in England and Wales, the latest statistics which I have seen were published last year, 2019. They showed that 7% of the court judiciary and 11% of the tribunal judiciary were from ethnic minorities. The figures vary at different levels of the judicial system. By way of example, 3 of the 100 or so High Court judges are from ethnic minorities, and 1 of the 38 Court of Appeal judges that is me. That can be contrasted with the position at the beginning of this century, when there were no judges in the High Court or Court of Appeal who were from ethnic minorities. Indeed, there never had been in history. It is also important to note that by statute, the JAC
to turn it down. Oh, there it is.
have a majority of members who are not judges. Some are judges and some are lawyers, but many are laypersons. And the chair of the JAC must be a layperson, not a lawyer. This structure was created for 2 reasons. The first is to avoid the risk of what was known as cloning, the risk that, however unconsciously, people tend to appoint other people in their own image. The second reason was to ensure public confidence in the appointment process. I would like to end on this note. The JAC was created not only because it was considered to be a useful body to improve the diversity in the judiciary, a task which it has in fact succeeded in performing, although there is still much to be done in England and Wales. It is also an important part of our constitutional arrangements because it is an independent, arm's-length body which is responsible for judicial appointments. the executive cannot control judicial appointments. This helps to maintain the independence of the judiciary and is an important aspect of the rule of law in this country. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all well, both for the rest of your conference and in your future careers.
Inspirational words there. We're really honoured to hear from Lord Justice Singh. So now a USA perspective. When Chief Justice Tani G. Cantil-Sakauye was sworn into office in January 2011 as the 28th Chief Justice of California, she was the first Filipina American and the second woman to serve as the state's Chief Justice. In her 9 years in office, amongst many achievements and honours, Chief Justice Cantil-Sakauye has emerged as one of the country's leading advocates for equal access to justice, transparency, and reform of state court funding models that unfairly impact the poor. She has also led initiatives to address implicit bias and human trafficking, to keep children in school and out of the criminal justice system, and to revitalise civic learning and get the public engaged with the courts and the government. We are so privileged now to hear from the Chief Justice.
Thank you, Ms. Wong, and thank you to the Asian Australian Lawyers Association for inviting me to your Diversity Summit. I'm Tani Cantil-Sakauye. I am the Chief Justice of California. I am the second woman ever to hold this office, and I am the first Asian American to hold this office. Incidentally, the first minority to hold this office. I have served 14 years on the California trial courts as a judge, 6 years on the California Courts of Review, our intermediate appellate courts, and now I've served 10 years as Chief Justice of California, the state's top judge, running the judiciary and heading the California Supreme Court. The California judiciary is the largest judiciary in the United States. We're double the size of the federal judiciary. We have about 2,400 jurists. I've been on the bench now approximately 30 years. And I stand here today only because of diversity, only because of the lawyers and the leaders, and frankly, all the old white men who encouraged me to apply to the bench, to the many governors who appointed me and promoted me. And that's all in the name of diversity and merit, and also community support. Before I speak to the all-important issue of diversity, I want to first briefly talk to you about the two ways that judges are sent to our benches, on the federal side and on the state side. As you know, on the federal side, our president appoints to our courts for lifetime appointments, and those appointments have to be approved by our Senate. Now, you know that there is currently in the United States a hot topic issue about the next appointment to our United States Supreme Court by our president. But in the United States, amongst our 50 states, like your states, there are varying ways that lawyers become judges. Most states do have a merit vetting process with requirements and conditions, but some states have purely political processes. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or another party determines whether or not you get to the bench to serve the public. In California, the governor appoints 99% of our 2,300 jurists. There's a small percentage, 1% or so, that may run for office if there's a vacancy the governor does not fill. But when the governor appoints, he or she first uses a vetting process where attorneys may anonymously vet and evaluate the candidate in writing. The general public has a right for input. These are for our trial judges who serve 6 years before they stand for election. Our appellate justices and our justices on the California Supreme Court, we also are vetted in the same way, but there's an additional layer. The Attorney General also weighs in on the qualifications of the jurist to become and move to the higher court. I've gone through this process now 4 times. I've been elevated by 3 governors, and I've stood for statewide election once and multiple elections in different districts numerous times in my 30 years. And one thing that I can tell you is how important it is to have diversity on the bench. Why? Because the judiciary, more than any other branch of government, relies on the public trust and confidence of the jurists for whom the cases appear. Jurists are known to be impartial and fair and even-handed, and our litigants, particularly in California, a majority-minority state, come to us to have their problems resolved. And so, does it help that we look like our litigants? Absolutely. Does it help that we or some member of our family or in our history or our ancestors had the same issue they're having? Absolutely. Do we understand the cultural differences that make people appear shy or reluctant to come to court? Absolutely. The law is improved by different eyes and different experiences and different voices. The law governs all, and therefore all should be a part to the extent they wish to participate and are qualified to do so. And the only way I came to the bench to become the top judge in California is because of the diversity, the narrative, the demand to our governors, our appointing powers, from the bar associations that decided that I should be the one that they were going to root for this time, because we came together. And now in my position as the chief, I look for diversity in my appointments, in groups, in leadership. I mentor. And I mean diversity writ large. I mean diversity not only with the all-important gender and culture, but also in terms of work experience, geography, urban and rural, status, military veterans, as well as people and attorneys from the disabled community or who serve the disabled community. It's an interesting fact in California that while I've been 10 years on the Supreme Court, that there's a time when out of 7 justices, 4 of us were Asian. Out of 7 justices, 4 of us were women. That doesn't exist now, but California tries mightily to achieve diversity every day. Never in a moment do we forget it, because it means that we create a better product, a better law, more inclusive, more collaborative. I wish you the best as you think about the other new, better ways to improve our judiciary by making it more diverse. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
So that was fantastic to hear from such a trailblazer and role model. So now we move on to the Australian perspective. Pauline is the president of the Law Council of Australia and is a past president of both the Law Society of New South Wales and the New South Wales Council for Civil Liberties. She's an accredited specialist in environmental planning and development law and partner of environmental and planning law firm P.J. Donnellan & Co. Pauline is a past Vice President of New South Wales Women Lawyers, an executive member of New South Wales Young Lawyers, and was the long-term chair of the Environmental Planning and Development Law Committee of the Law Society of New South Wales. Pauline is a singer, actor, playwright, and director-producer, and was a co-founder of the Five Lands Walk, an annual cultural and arts festival on the Central Coast since 2006. She's president of the Five Lands Artists Collective. I had a wonderful discussion with Pauline early this week, which I'm excited to share with you. Hi, Pauline. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our conference attendees really appreciate you taking the time.
It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So we're here to have a discussion about judicial appointments from the Australian perspective. So as a first question, from your perspective as President of the Law Council of Australia, can you tell us why diversity on the bench is important?
Well, first of all, I'll start by saying, as the peak representative body for lawyers in Australia, the Law Council will mainly be, I as President will comment mainly on the federal judiciary, but I think that a lot of those issues will be relevant across all levels of judicial positions in Australia, and maybe some international resonance as well. But to me, the 3 essential qualities the judiciary has to maintain to uphold the rule of law and Australia's constitutional system are its strength, its independence, and transparency. Diversity on the bench is essential for public confidence in and support for the administration of justice. And this directly relates to the importance of justice being seen to be done as well as being done. A homogenous bench threatens public perceptions of transparency and independence in the appointment process and in our judges. A judiciary that reflects the society from which it's drawn not only encourages public confidence in the judiciary, it brings with it a broader set of perspectives to inform decision-making that's impossible without inclusivity and diversity. And hopefully that improves justice outcomes. Yeah. In terms of independence, I think our judiciary is undoubtedly independent, although a more transparent appointment system might ensure public confidence in that. It's strong in the sense that it's rich with talent, expertise, empathy and competence, but the lack of diversity amongst federal judges prompts us to ask, if the judiciary benefited from a wider range of experiences and perspectives, could it be even stronger? And yeah.
Yeah, some great points there. So following on from that, can you tell our listeners to what extent the appointment process currently fosters or encourages diversity, in particular gender and cultural diversity on the bench?
Well, there really is no formal process at the moment, and many people would be aware that there is a lack of judicial diversity. They'd be aware of that through anecdotal evidence or simply from glancing at the pictures of federal judges in Australia over the years, and that is supported by the data. To quote one of the AALA's own reports, the 2015 Cultural Diversity Report, one culturally and linguistically diverse group, Asian Australians, accounts for only 0.8% of the judiciary. So we know that whatever's happening now isn't working. And the Law Council's final report of the Justice Project in 2018 revealed that a lack of diversity is a challenge at all levels of the legal profession. So a lack of culturally responsive, informed and accessible legal services was found by the final report of the Justice Project to be a key impediment to access to justice in Australia. So increasing diversity amongst a number of areas beyond gender and age could really address that gap, and that would include on the bench. And I think it's timely to note the words of the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She said in 1998, a system of justice is the richer for diversity of background and experience. It's the poorer in terms of appreciating what is at stake and the impacts of its judgments if its members, its lawyers, jurors and judges are all cast from the same mould. So currently the Commonwealth Attorney General is responsible for recommending federal judicial appointments to the Australian government, and the process is largely opaque. There's currently no discernible process by which qualities such as gender or cultural diversity factor into the making of appointments. And whether that does occur in practice is entirely at the discretion of the Attorney General. So beyond the need to have been enrolled as a practitioner for more than 5 years, there's really no requirement beyond that other than in the family court, where there is a statutory requirement that you're suitable to deal with relevant matters by reason of training, experience and personality. So we know that there's a real lack of diversity at the moment, so what's happening now isn't working.
Okay, great. And some wise words from the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg there that we'll take away and think about. So then, in your view, are there any reforms that would help us ensure that the bench resembles the wider Australian community as it grows, changes and develops?
The Law Council has suggested several key reforms for the judiciary to better reflect and appear to reflect the society from which it's drawn. And these relate to the federal courts, Commonwealth tribunals and all levels of judicial office except at the High Court of Australia, for which appointments are already subject to a statutory requirement for consultation, given that court's position as the ultimate appellate court in Australia. And these include both cultural steps and changes to judicial appointment protocol. So this is not intended to be a permissive exercise. People are entitled to be appointed if they've got the qualifications. Increasing diversity in the profession has positive flow-on benefits for access to justice, and a great disservice is done to the legal profession and the community through the indirect, unintentional or otherwise exclusion of people from more diverse backgrounds from its ranks. But our first suggested reform would be taking cultural steps to promote diversity. That's not going to happen overnight because it's got to tackle the culture of the legal profession from the bottom up. In light of the findings in the Justice Project, the Law Council accepted responsibility for building on existing efforts to promote greater diversity within the legal profession by seeking to increase its proportion of people who are culturally and linguistically diverse, including LGBTI people, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people, people with disability and older people. So there's no one answer as to how to promote greater diversity. But one existing initiative in the gender equality space with potential transferability to other areas is the Law Council's equitable briefing policy. That was launched in 2016 and it was specifically directed to redress gender imbalance at the bar and increase access to suitably qualified barristers to ensure great outcomes for clients. So we're pretty thrilled at how that has worked so far. What it asks is that those who brief or select barristers commit to making all reasonable efforts to brief female barristers with relevant seniority so that we get more women getting briefs and getting good briefs. And so far, the proportion of briefs that briefing entities reported giving to women barristers increased from 20% after the first year to 25% after the second and 27% after the third. So it's working. And briefing entities also reported increasing their payments to female barristers from 15% after the first policy year up to 20% after the third year. So that's, again, an improvement. We've still got a way to go, but it's an improvement. So these sorts of policies really do work. Where we also have to look at tackling unconscious bias as well as briefing. We want to make sure that appointments truly are based on excellence and not influenced by the comfort of familiarity. So the Law Council recommends that people raise awareness and take part in training programs that are available from the Law Council to really raise awareness of the inherent biases that we all carry. Because if we're promoting people to partnership level, if we're appointing people as silks at the bar, and these are the people from whom judicial appointments are drawn, then we have to get rid of those inherent biases, which are generally not conscious. They're simply coming from our inherent comfort with familiarity in many cases. So if cultural reforms are accompanied by change in society more broadly, there are much better chances of a diverse pool of candidates for the judiciary as a prerequisite to ensuring an effective appointment process. So our second reforms relate to the actual judicial appointment protocol. Right there at the beginning at judicial appointment stage. And in the Law Council's view, the Australian government should adopt and adequately resource a formal judicial appointment process that promotes greater transparency and accountability. We don't want to see the kind of politicisation of judicial appointments as we've been witnessing lately in the United States. But this would allow just a more formal process to be adopted to improve faith and transparency in the process. So what we're looking at is the Commonwealth Attorney General consulting with the Chief Justice, Chief Judge and Chief Judicial Officers of courts within the jurisdictions and the legal profession to establish a formal judicial appointments protocol. And it would have transparent, merit-based, truly merit-based eligibility criteria for necessary skills, attributes and experience. For example, a high level of professional achievement and effectiveness in the candidate's area of practice, as well as those desirable professional and personal qualities, social awareness, gender and cultural awareness are attributes that could be considered in that context. Any protocol should map out a clear selection process requiring the Attorney General to personally consult a minimum number of identified office holders prior to the appointment. And that would, of course, include the Chief Justice of the relevant court and the presidents of the Law Council and the Australian Bar Association. And we believe that that protocol could apply and should apply to appoint federal judges as well as tribunal members. So that's something that we've long advocated, in fact, since September 2008, when we released our policy statement on the process of judicial appointments. So that's still available on our website, and it's something that we've long pushed for and we'd like to see happen.
Yeah, so great initiatives there. So I like how we're not only looking at the appointment process, but looking at the pipeline for where we get to those senior practitioners who are sort of eligible for that tap on the shoulder, as well as sort of teasing out there's the definition of merit and what that means for greater openness, transparency. You know, I encourage everyone to read that paper and get on board. Okay, so last question. Other than what has already been discussed, are there any other reforms to judicial appointments that you'd like to see?
Well, I think at a fundamental level, any process should include monitoring those three essential qualities of strength, independence and transparency of the federal judiciary to evaluate Australia's judicial appointment system. So an ongoing monitoring to make sure that those three essential parts are still being maintained. And to foster diversity in Australia's judiciary, it's vital that we pursue both reforms I referred to. However impartial, merits-based and transparent a protocol for judicial appointments might be, it can't result in real change if the right candidates are simply not available. And drawing candidates from a broader pool has got to be the answer. And that includes across the profession too, and not just drawing the judiciary from the barristers branch of the profession. We find greater diversity with equivalent excellence in the upper reaches of the solicitors branch of the profession, yet most appointments continue to be drawn from the barristers branch. Noting that Asian Australians make up about 12% of the population. It was only in 2018 that the first QCs of Chinese descent were appointed at all, and there were 2 in that year, which was great to see. But a study in 2018 of partners in large law firms showed that up to 8% of partners in large law firms were of Asian descent, which is much bigger factor comparatively. So what we want to see as a profession to ensure equality of opportunity for lawyers is ensuring that right from the beginning, from the time people start in their careers right until the senior years of their lives, that they have that equal opportunity no matter their cultural background or their gender through that life cycle of their careers as legal professionals.
Yeah. Oh, great. Some fantastic takeaways there. So I think that's all we have time for today. So once again, thank you so much, Pauline. Thank you for sharing your view and your ideas about reform and the Law Council of Australia's initiatives and sort of the work they've been doing in this space. And yeah, we're not doing a Q&A today as we're pre-recorded, but if anyone has any questions for Pauline, feel free to email them through and, you know, we're happy to liaise. Once again, thank you, Pauline.
Well, thank you very much.
What a wonderful set of speakers. Thank you to Lord Justice Rabinder Singh, Chief Justice Tani Cantil-Sakauye, and Pauline Wright for your very inspirational words. There's some great points there. Can we adopt aspects from the US and UK appointment systems? What about the proposals put forward by the Law Council of Australia? Food for thought from our inspiring and thoughtful speakers. Before I sign off, I'd like to thank Stephanie Tan, WA Branch Secretary, and Molina Asthana, National Vice President, for their support in putting this session together.
Hi everyone. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, hello. Wow. Whoa, you guys look all so good. Hi everyone. If you want to turn on your video, I'd like to see your beautiful face. Hi Sarah. Hi Jenny with the headphone. You look like Telstra right now. Hi Kasing, nice to see you. Hi Rishi. Hi Katrina, nice to see you. I got my hat on too. Hi Molina, nice to see you. Oh wow, how you guys going? You're making a lot of money. A lawyer, you know, hit the money. You know what? I had a dream for my daughter to be, you know, make a lot of money too. But before I do that, can I show you a video? I don't know if you know who I am. Could someone make me a co-host so I can share a video so you know who I am? But while I wait for that, my name is Kim Hung Nawing. Hi, thank you. And I perform in the Melbourne Comedy Festival. And you know, before I was listening to you talk about diversity, and you know, it's so important that we have all our stories shared, no matter what job you have. And I want to share you this video so you get to know who I am, because this is my story here. Okay, here we go.
Hey, I'm Phi Nguyen. I'm second generation Vietnamese Australian. I live in Springvale with my mum.
You can't park in a disabled area. Are you disabled?
Sorry, I don't speak English.
I know you speak English. You do this all the time.
And Uncle Ray.
If when you cross the road, make sure you look left and right.
I'm in year 10 in Springvale High.
I'm choosing my VC subjects for next year.
Oh yeah, choosing subject. You should pick special ed math.
Hey.
Hey, Danny.
While you're here, should we run some lines for the play?
What is subject here? Drama. What drama?
It's acting.
Alas! You want to jump up and down, roll on the floor? I don't want to sew and work hard so that you be an actor.
Mr. McPhail, my drama teacher.
I told you not to do drama. Stop putting idea in her head. You're a bad influence.
Okay.
Faith, you cannot have a boyfriend, huh? I am the only special person in your life. Do you know any famous Asian actor in the movie?
No.
Yeah, there are heaps, Mum. My celebrity crush, Lucy Liu.
Wow. Wow. Remember, our family honor.
My mother can be unbearable.
Stop being inspirational. Stop saying she's good acting. She can't make money to look after me.
Annoying.
Be under control.
Demanding.
You want the flat luck? No flutter.
Doctor, Fee, doctor.
But she loves me.
Fee, you ugly.
That's a little bit about me. Had anyone seen me before I'm famous? No? Andrew Goodwin, you look like a bit confused at the moment. Male, oh, put your glasses on, hello. Hi, Gopal Sin, nice to see you. Peter, I love your mustache, Peter. Oh my goodness. Wow, that's a lot of hair on your face. Wow, and it's style too. So beautiful to see your face here on a Saturday. And you know, we're going through a hard time in life. It's a hard time, you know, and I've been through hard time too. You know, my story that I came here by boat so that my daughter would have a better future. And I know many of you here are also wanting a better future. That's why you work in the legal, you know, you make a lot of money in the legal. But, you know, Vietnamese people, we don't talk a lot. We yell more than talking. You know, we want the best for our children. Can I ask in the Snapchat, in the chat box, can you tell me if if you had other dreams than being a lawyer? Can you write down for me if you wanted to be an X Factor star or a race car driver or a rubbish bin collector? You know, we all have dreams. Oh, artist, pilot, chef, oh, master chef. Giancarlo, I hope I said your name right. Tristan, bodybuilder. Wow. Tristan, can you show me your body? If you're a bodybuilder. Wow. Fashion designer. Oh, so many creative artists here. Actor, Rosalind. Oh, no, you can't be an actor. I am the only famous one here today. Oh, Stella, my dream is to have a Fit and Me t-shirt. Stop it. You want a bribe me? I can't, I'm poor. I can't give you a t-shirt at the pandemic time. A composer. Oh, it's so beautiful that all of you as lawyers all also have dream. And, you know, I do want to say a dream with you. I'm a bit shy. Okay, I tell you. I always wanted to be the #1 singer in Australia. I'm going to audition for a show called Australia Got No Talent. And I'm so excited. You know, they bring out the form out last weekend. I hope that I could sing it for you. I got my karaoke microphone. Testing, 1, 2. Bluetooth mode. Testing, 1, 2. Oh, Stella, you can go buy a FEME face mask. We are pivoting. We are pivoting all the time. So you can go to our Redbubble and you could buy a face mask. You just remind me I should get a face mask too. Okay. But I want to sing you a song. I want to try it out. Anyone single here? Put your hand up. Anyone single looking for love? Oh, Kim, I see you put your hand up. I feel you, honey. High five. High five. High five. Yeah, thank you, Kim. Erin, my dream job was to retire without any money issue. I understand how you feel. Okay. Okay, I'm going to sing you the song that I want to sing on the show. Just give me a second. Oh, hang on. I need my fan. Give me a second. I need my fan. Okay, here we go. I just want you to imagine me looking like Mariah Carey. You know, I look like Mariah Carey. Here we go. No, I can't forget that evening, or your face as you were leaving, but I get that just the way the story goes. You always smile, but in your eye, your sorrow shows. Yet your face so Francis Lim, your face is showing me how happy you are right now. I can't live, it's living it without you. Hi Kathy, I can't live with you at Jazeer. I can't live, it's living it without you. I can't live. I can't live anymore. Thank you. I can hear the applause. Wow, it's deafening. The applause is deafening. Wow, you can hear it from Springvale. Wow, thank you so much. You're so beautiful. And you know what? This conference is going to go for a really long time. And you know, I want that to be accent, you know, all about, I'll put the microphone down. I just love the karaoke sound. You know, being a lawyer, it's all about the accent you do in life. You know, the accent to be a lawyer, to fight the law, to represent people. And I feel like you're going to be sitting on your bum for a very long time today. So can I ask you to all, if you can stand up with me, if you can stand up, right? Katrina, I know you will stand up. You've been laughing the whole time. I've been looking at you on the beach. How is the beach over there? Very good. Very nice. I just want to, you know, get us moving before you do the next talking thing, because it seemed like it'd be a lot of talking today. But I want to do some movement with you, if that's okay. It's my favorite song, and I want you to kiss.
Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style. 낮에는 따사로운 인간적인 여자, 커피 한 잔에 여유를 아는 품격 있는 여자, 밤이 오면 심장이 뜨거워지는 여자, 그런 반전 있는 여자. 너는 선호해, 낮에는 너만큼 따사로운 그런 선호해, 커피 식기도 전에 원샷 때리는 선호해, 밤이 오면 심장이 터져버리는 선호해, 그런 선호해. 아름다운 오빤 강남스타일 강남스타일 오빤 강남스타일 강남스타일 오빤 강남스타일 Hey sexy lady 오빤 강남스타일 Hey sexy lady.
Oh, wow, you guys so good. Oh, Andrew, wow, you're a wild animal over there. Wow, Katrina, I see you, Katrina, and I see you, Kassim. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great conference, everyone. And I will talk to you soon. Bye. 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 See you later. Bye.
It's my pleasure now to formally start the last session of the day, session 4, Collaborating for Cultural Diversity in the Law. Unfortunately, our program moderator, Lisa Anise, the CEO of Diversity Council Australia, has been called away at the last minute to a family emergency. Lisa, we wish you and your family all the best. We're very lucky that we actually have the National Vice President, Molina on the panel, and Molina has agreed at the last minute to step in as moderator, which we're very lucky to have her do. As I said, Molina is the National Vice President of AALA. Molina is a commercial lawyer that has worked in many top-tier law firms and also with the Victorian government. Molina sits on many boards, including Gymnastic Victoria Commission. Molina has won many awards, including the Victorian Multicultural Award for Excellence twice. Over to you, Molina.
Thank you, Anand, for your kind introduction. And I do apologize on behalf of Lisa, who called me just a little while ago to let me know of the family emergency. So I will be taking over her place to moderate. And since I was a panelist before, I was meant to be a panelist before, I will change the format to ask questions and may give the AALA perspective as comments to the response by other panelists. We do have a great panel, people I know from our previous collaborations and also personally. We want to give this relationship a bit more formality after the summit. So I will introduce to you briefly our speakers. Their full bios are in the summit program. So Donald, first I'll introduce Donald Betts Jr. He is the founder and secretary of the North American Australian Lawyers Alliance. He served as a US Kansas State Senator, Kansas State Congressman in the Kansas House of Representatives. He is currently employed at law firm Norton Rose Fulbright. I've known Donald for years and years, even before he did his law degree in Australia. So welcome, Donald. Next up is Amani Green. Amani is currently president of the African Australian Legal Network. Amani is working as an associate with Honorable Justice O'Brien at the Federal Court of Australia and is passionate about diversity and inclusion. Last but not the least is Jazeer Nijamudeen, who co-founded and is immediate past president of the Muslim Legal Network. Jazeer is a government lawyer and has held leadership roles at a number of organizations, including the Islamic Council of Victoria and Youth Law, Victoria's Free Community Legal Center for Young People. So thank you to all of you for joining us today. And I think I will begin by asking you a little bit about your organization. So can you start by telling me about the organization you're involved with and the work it does to improve the representation of culturally diverse individuals in the profession? So perhaps Donald can go first.
Thank you, Molina, and thank you, AALA, for having me as a panelist on this phenomenal conference. It's groundbreaking. Well, I'll come to you from 2 points of views, from my employer at Norton Rose Fulbright and the organization that the North American Australian Lawyers Alliance. Norton Rose Fulbright, both locally and globally, has a focus on creating a more culturally diverse workforce to mirror the communities in which we do business. We have tracked our cultural profile through the surveys since 2018 and will continue to do so to ensure we are moving in the right direction. We also know that we are more diverse in our junior ranks than we are in our partnership. And we have a goal to change that as much as we have to, because we have to ensure that everyone feels that they can bring their whole selves to work every day and have a sense of belonging. We have a cultural diversity think tank of interested people from across the business, led by a partner, I believe she's on today, Natasha Toholka, a great partner, Norton Rose Fulbright, who heads the diversity and inclusion. And we come together to create events to keep the focus and momentum on the topic as we create the strategy. For example, next week we've invited a race discrimination commissioner, Chen, to speak to our firm on the topic. This event aims to shine the spotlight on the more subtle, everyday and repetitive acts of macroaggression that people experience in society and in business that makes them feel that they don't belong. This can be subtle as not being able to pronounce someone's name and not learning how to pronounce that person's name, to the issue of confusing two people from the same cultural background repetitively. Our focus is on our recruitment processes and ensuring our brand is one that reflects our desire to be more culturally diverse. In 2017, we signed the law firm Cultural Diversity Initiative. It's a charter to commit to making systemic change in the legal profession. As it relates to NALA, we continue to strive for cultural diversity through the diversity reflected on our board. And our words are demonstrated by action. We are the only non-Indigenous cultural law association with a First Nations person on our board of directors, serving in the important role of global Indigenous representative. So we strongly believe that our action speaks louder than words, and if we want others to comply to diversity, we should also lead by example in that charge.
Thank you, Donald. I do know the fabulous work that your firm as well as your organization is doing, and we have collaborated in the past to do some events together. So thank you so much for that insight into what you guys are doing. I will move on to Amani, and Amani, if you can tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing.
Sure. So the African Australian Legal Network, very similar to the AALA, is an association of mostly African Australian lawyers and law students that was incorporated last year. Again, similarly to what your organization does, just I imagine the audience has some familiarity, so I think it's a good analogy to draw. We really want to influence cultural diversity in the law sort of from two different angles. One is by upskilling our members so that there are sort of assisting African Australians to be more competitive in the legal job market, you know, through seminars and through workshops and the like, and providing networking and mentorship opportunities. And the second facet of it is actually advocacy to the legal profession more generally, trying to ensure that legal institutions, including law firms, the courts, government agencies, embed cultural diversity in their practice. And of course, Molina, you and I have talked about and certainly will work together with our organizations on that goal in particular, because I think our voices are stronger advocating to the profession when we work together. So that's really the ethos of the ALN when it comes to cultural diversity in the law. We're trying to push that from both angles, both from the ground up, but also advocating so that that change can happen from the top down.
Thank you, Amani, and I've been very fortunate to attend your launch and further events after that. So it was, it's been, and also it's been interesting talking about collaborations and how AALN can learn from some of our learnings, I suppose, as well, AALA through the years that we've been through. So thank you for that. And next on is Jazeer.
Hi, everyone. I think, so I was a co-founder of the Muslim Legal Network and a president for a number of years at the MLN. So I'll be speaking on the MLN perspective, as you all know, I can't really represent the Commonwealth Government on diversity issues. But the Muslim Legal Network was established in 2008 to empower Muslim lawyers and law students to reach their potential and work towards a society in which everyone has equal access to justice. We've empowered members by providing mentoring, volunteering and networking opportunities. And our annual iftar dinner has been a highlight for a number of years that brings together members of the judiciary and the broader legal profession to familiarise each other with these minority communities within the legal profession. I still recall one of our iftar dinners when the member of the judiciary who was giving the keynote speech said, "This is the first time I've actually met a Muslim legal practitioner outside of the court context." So I think building that familiarity is really important for members of minority communities within the legal profession. But in terms of improving access to justice, MLN consistently delivers legal education seminars and legal referral services in an effort to ensure that the community is also brought along on this journey of increasing diversity in the legal profession. We've supported broader efforts as well to increase diversity through roundtable discussions with key stakeholders and collaborating on relevant events with the Asian Australian Lawyer Association. As a leader in this space, it's been great to work with AALA and collaborate on a number of initiatives, including hearing from a Muslim, a member of the judiciary who comes from a Muslim background. Our people as well, including the new leadership team at the MLN, are a wonderful example of cultural diversity. So we have representatives from Turkish backgrounds, from Sri Lankan, Indian, Pakistani backgrounds, Somali backgrounds. So across a number of different culturally diverse ethnic backgrounds, but all sharing a common religious identity. And it's been quite challenging for us as a religious community because it's I guess not recognized as easily, as readily as an ethnic minority community. But there are in the world that we live in, with increased Islamophobia and you know, the recent situation in Christchurch, we know that there is significant disadvantage for members of certain religious communities, not just our own. So it's been a pleasure to work with the ethnic lawyer associations in this space.
Thank you, Jazeer. There's very important work that your organization is doing as well. And we know Islamophobia is a problem, not only in Australia, but worldwide. And I think if organizations like yours take responsibility for creating greater awareness of other cultures and their ethos, it's really, I think it's a great thing to do. Your iftar dinner is obviously the highlight of the season, so we'll look forward to the next one. So moving on from that, I'll actually talk, maybe I'll give you a bit of, most people do know about AALA, so I'm not going to delve into too much detail, but we do similar stuff, but we do student outreach, we do career option workshops. We've launched recently a foreign qualified lawyers initiative. We've got mentoring, we've got a scholarship program. You have an opportunity to be part of our committees, and now we're going to be nationwide now, so we have even more opportunity to contribute to advocacy and objectives. We've also do cultural events like Chinese New Year and Diwali. We have recently launched a very interesting initiative, which is the Blackboard, and I think some of you have been able to experience. We've shared that with you today, so you know what it is all about. You can post. It's a really good sharing tool where we share business ideas and arrangements, equitable briefing, career and market opportunities, and that is an area where I would love to collaborate with other cultural diversity organizations as well, where we would want them to be part of that. We want to create a worldwide big Blackboard where everyone can be part, all cultural diversity legal associations can be part of, and maybe even other cultural diversity organizations. So that's what a little bit about what we have been doing recently. So I move on to the next question, which is, why is it important for the legal profession to be representative of the Australian community? I think we all have very strong views about that. So I'd like to hear from the three of you. Maybe we'll do a different order this time. Amani, you can go first.
Sure. Well, I feel like, honestly, I feel like the answer to this is sort of taken as somewhat self-evident, I suppose. I think we know now that legal organizations, be they commercial firms or government agencies or corporations, will function better if they have a representative sample of the community, and that includes race as well as gender and sexual orientation and a number of other things. The diversity improves the function of these organizations. Of course, looking at the court system and the bar and the criminal justice system, obviously those systems will all work better to serve the entire Australian community if the diversity of the community was represented. It can take steps to eliminate institutional racism, having a more racially diverse workforce, as well as introducing the perspectives of a more diverse range of people to those organizations. But I think by and large, the legal profession and legal organizations think that this is true. I think we've sort of passed the point in the debate where people query that. The real issue is actually taking concrete steps to address it, right? And I think that's where we as a profession have done really well in terms of, say, gender diversity, but have really faltered in terms of cultural diversity. I think most of these organizations believe that they should be more culturally diverse. I think the more interesting question, and indeed the more complex question, is how are they going to do that? But sort of those are my thoughts on the matter.
Thank you. Thanks. I'll move on to Jazeer. Perhaps you can give your views.
Thanks, Molina. Yeah, I think the importance of diversity in the legal profession is something that has been spoken about on numerous occasions in terms of innovation, in terms of being able to cater to diverse sets of clientele from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. I think it's commonly accepted that there's a significant benefit, and as Amani said, where we've seemed to be faltering is perhaps in taking action, but also in actually collecting data across the different subsets of diversity. So academic research indicated that 61.6% of Muslim respondents had experienced racism in their workplace or when seeking employment, in comparison to the national average of 17.9%. When I guess having been in the profession for a few years now, it becomes something where your skills and your experiences make it less likely that you're going to experience overt racism, and it perhaps even unconscious bias becomes less common. But when I spoke to some of my peers at the Muslim Legal Network, I was shocked to hear a story from a solicitor who's just 2 years out that was identical to a story that Her Honour Magistrate Orfa Masood shared when reflecting on her experience many, many years ago as a very junior practitioner. So I think while we've made progress in many ways, some of these significant cultural biases that exist in the broader community have no doubt seeped into the legal profession in a significant way. And as much as education tends to reduce the likelihood of racism and cultural biases, I think there's still a fair bit of work to do in that space to ensure that people can reach their potential and make the maximum possible positive impact that they want to make on the profession and on the community, despite their cultural or religious background.
Thank you, Jazeer. You touched upon an important subject of collecting statistics, and I think recently the LCA has started collecting statistics about people who are from culturally diverse backgrounds, but there is a lot of other statistics that we can collect, we can talk about, which is Australia has got 25% of its population is multicultural background, but how much do we see in the legal profession, especially at the top, maybe 2 or 3%. So those kind of statistics are important to actually highlight the issue at large. With that, I will ask Donald to share his views. You're on mute, Donald.
Molina, thank you for the question. I think it's also important that we not only look at how the legal profession can be more representative of the Australian community, but how those within the legal profession can embrace the community not being behind the bench or in a robe. A good example of that is Associate Supreme Court Justice Rodney Randall. I mean, I see him everywhere in all of our organizations. To have that engagement with a judge on our platform and on our stage is telling of the man. It's telling of the legal profession. The Australian community is a diverse community on the surface, each member contributing to the fabric that makes it great. The legal profession is also great, but lacks the diversity reflective of the diverse communities that make Australia great. It is difficult to break from familiar and comfortable traditions and attitudes manifested within the legal profession, but I believe it is very important that the legal profession understand that the same familiarity, traditions, and attitudes of the legal profession that a client holds dear can make a client's experience more comfortable when interfacing with the law. For someone that speaks Adamaldina or Yoruba or Greek, Hindi, Mandarin, Arabic, or American like me, the tension has the possibility of easing a client's anxiety, legal anxiety, significantly.
Thank you, Donald. And I completely agree with that. I think this is not just an issue about practitioners. It is equally about people trying to access the justice system. If people of multicultural backgrounds do not feel adequately represented, or their issues are understood because of, say, language, culture, or socioeconomic factors, then this is really an issue of access to justice, and not just about diversity, as narrow as diversity. And I think also, I mean, to ignore the diverse cohort is to be bereft of the cultural capital that they collectively represent. We all represent that, and if employers are not taking advantage of that, or if the system is not taking advantage of that, there's a complete failure of the system, I believe. I'll move on to the next question, which was going to be about barriers, but I think we all know a lot of the barriers that we face. Most people in this room would have faced those barriers. So I'll move on to actually talking about how do we challenge the existing systems and structures that produce such homogeneity in the profession. Jazeer, maybe you can start with that.
Sure. I guess I mentioned earlier about a story that I heard, and I didn't describe it. So I thought before I answer the question, I might just describe it. And it really was, it seems to be a very common story, especially among Muslim legal practitioners who are visibly practicing their religion. So whether if they're wearing a hijab, or perhaps they have a long beard and they identify that as being part of their religious tradition. And this was about people who are having really good telephone interviews with HR reps, and then turning up for the interview and being told, oh, actually, we don't need to do an interview. The interview is no longer needed. Just complete this form and we'll let you know. And of course, what they let her know was that she wasn't successful for the role. And these stories seem to be very common. So I think from a why it's important to address this issue, there is that fairness and equal opportunity for legal professionals, and the enduring impact of Islamophobia or racism that impacts people from different cultural and religiously diverse backgrounds. So in terms of what can we do, I think staff training on cultural sensitivity positive policies to have diverse individuals in positions of leadership are really important. Something that often comes up in my discussions with legal practitioners, members of the Muslim Legal Network, is a concern about tokenism and it being about more than just tokenism, having metrics or quotas for diversity in leadership roles and measuring them, whether that leads to action or not may be dependent on a number of different factors. But the decision not to collect that information, I think, is a flaw. There should be an active effort to collect that information and then decide on what factors are causing the figures that they're finding. Bonding sessions like Friday night drinks is something that is often mentioned to me by Muslim legal practitioners, and I guess the general prevalence of alcohol. And I think that might be something that's even a bit more specific to Muslim legal practitioners or practitioners from certain sort of backgrounds that don't consume alcohol. And that's a challenge that many of them find in networking and being seen to be feeling accepted, I guess, in a community. So some training on that would be really important, and just being respectful about it is all really that's necessary. I think I've been very lucky to have worked with partners and teams that have been very capable of addressing cultural diversity and tackling those issues in a respectful manner. And I'm very grateful that I've been able to learn from how they deal with that and then be able to apply that in other contexts. Because as I mentioned earlier, when I'm working with the Muslim Legal Network, there's a very broad difference in cultural diversity of our members and our volunteers. And I actually apply some of the learnings from senior partners or CEOs that champion diversity. And I applied it even on a smaller level, on a smaller context. And I wish more legal practitioners would do that and encourage that. So one example that I remember from my first year of working is when Guillaume Swiggers at Deloitte Australia would, as a CEO, would always acknowledge almost every cultural event or cultural festivity of their staff, no matter what cultural or religious background it related to. There was some information, and it ended up being not only acknowledgement and acceptance and a celebration of cultural diversity, but also training. We would learn about different cultural festivities and what they mean to our fellow staff members who are writing about those activities, and that would form the water cooler chatter for that day. These are like small initiatives that can make a big difference culturally for the organization. But of course, we also have to check our own privilege and everyone and encourage everyone to check their privilege and make a conscious effort to check their own conscious and unconscious bias. I've come across, people from a Muslim background who maybe they have a prejudice against African American people or something, or vice versa. And we make an effort to correct that because, we can relate to them and help them understand that this is just a different manifestation of some of the experiences that you've had in your own life. So, help them relate. And I'd really like to work together more with the different cultural ethnic lawyer associations and tackle some of these issues and employ some systemic change. The key issue, I think, from a Muslim legal practitioner background for us at the moment is a lack of data. And there's been some concern that some lawyers perhaps don't want to identify themselves as according to their religion or their religious identity. But of course, these collection exercises are always optional. And the only people that are going to identify are those who are comfortable identifying. So if anything, if there was an exercise to collect data about religious and cultural backgrounds, we're going to have to do extra work to actually encourage people to be comfortable in identifying with those backgrounds, as opposed to people feeling hesitant because they don't want to identify and they're feeling compelled to do so. But I think this is a very important issue that there's a lot more work to be done in collecting this information.
Thank you, Jazeer. That was really useful. You did touch upon some interesting points about visibility. I think was the one we don't see. We need to see more role models, but I also want to highlight and highlight the work that they do. But I think here again, we don't want to see the same faces for the sake of tokenism, because that reinforces that there are only a few of us that are capable of doing that job, which is certainly not true. And the other one is about education, and it's real education about cultures, about acceptance, about, you know, really, even if it's, you know, that bystander intervention training. I think one thing we're focusing on, especially through the LIV and the VLSP, is compulsory CPD on diversity and surrounding issues, perhaps as part of a professional management CPD. So that's something that can be looked at in the future. Thank you for that. I will move on to Amani for your comments, please.
Sure. I guess there's two ways to look at it, I think, from the perspective of the profession and from the perspective of sort of the individual or sort of the organizations like ours. I think with regard to the, I think with regard to the legal profession, I mean, to challenge the existing systems, there just needs to be a more robust commitment to changing their hiring practices. And I think that has to come from the top. You're seeing some of that language coming out of a firm like Herbert Smith Freehills recently has just sort of made a very strong commitment across their international business with regards to cultural diversity. And of course, Donald was talking about that with regards to Norton Rose Fulbright. But we need to see more of that from the legal profession. And then we need to see the results. That needs to translate into actually hiring more culturally diverse people at the ground level and then promoting them into more senior levels. I also think that there's a real question of the intersection between race and class here. So I came through the sort of I spent my first 2 years out of law school at one of the top tier law firms, and now I'm at the federal court. And I was the only Black person at my firm, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only Black associate at the federal court. But everybody, you know, who I started at my firm with went to a private school. Most of the associates that I know at the federal court went to a private school. And of course, you know, there are racial disparities in wealth and class, and particularly when you're looking at sort of recent migrant communities. I mean, I don't have data on this other than sort of what we've sort of collected through our membership, but a lot of folks that are members of the African Australian Legal Network are from you know, families that haven't been here for quite as long. The result of all this, I think, is that you end up hiring out of the top tier law schools and the top sort of high schools, all of which have, you know, I mean, private schools, but I mean, which has a really strong correlation with white people, right, and with people who aren't from diverse backgrounds. So I think that firms, and, you know, I mean, the top tier firms, but a lot of other firms need to get better actually at looking beyond those sort of like shared cultural signifiers that come through privilege, you know, be that sort of speaking in a certain way, having certain kinds of cultural touchstones. And generally, I think when firms are looking for cultural fit, that's often what folks are, I guess it's a euphemism in a lot of ways for a lack of diversity. So I think there's a lot of things that can change in terms of the hiring process, particularly looking at those intersections through race and class. I just want to touch briefly on what we can do and what our organizations can do. I would repeat what Jazeer said about research and data. I think that's really key, because if you go to the profession with, all right, this is how many people come from this background, it becomes much harder to refute, right? if your argument is based on data. And I think that's something that's really important. I think mentorship is also really important. Having folks who, because again, one of the things that reperpetuates that privilege is if, you know, my father was a lawyer and his father was a lawyer, and there's that gives you so much exposure to the profession. I think getting young folks who don't necessarily have lawyers in the family connected to other lawyers is something that we can really do to improve that access to opportunity. And the last thing I wanted to say is I think there more sort of, as I touched on before, more group advocacy from groups like ours getting together and going to the profession, and, you know, working through the LIV. We know Sam Pandya, the president of the LIV, has a really strong focus on cultural diversity right now. So actually taking that holistic approach and organizations and people working together, I think all of those things are things that we can do in order to achieve those results that I sort of was speaking about getting from the profession.
Thank you, Amani. Very valid points. And I agree with everyone's experience is the same about privilege in law firms as well. They all private school partners from private schools grew up watching the same TV shows, supporting footy teams, Friday night drinks. That's the culture you have to fit in when you join a law firm. And it's really difficult for people of culturally diverse backgrounds, and particularly migrants, to adapt to that. So, and that limits your opportunities in that law firm as well. So thanks for that, Amani, and quickly over to you, Donald.
Yeah, I mean, I've really been blessed with my role at Norton Rose Fulbright. I'm on a team of 10. There are 3 white people and 2 men, myself and my partner. And the women are as diverse as from India and China and Greece. I mean, it's just so diverse. So I'd like to know more and hear more in the future about this whole poverty wealth gap, because it sounds like it's important, and I think I see some of that happening in the United States, but it just hasn't been my experience here, and I see that in the chat line that it has been an experience for many people there. But throughout life, I've learned that the #1 barrier to genuine inclusion starts with ourselves, and understanding that we can't do it alone. It takes allies, mentors, and genuine friends to show us the way. We have to be willing to be uncomfortable before it becomes familiar. A great man by the name of William Lai, OAMQC, once told me that it takes grit to make it in the law. Molina, I've seen you have that grit. I've seen you out there before the law. You get out there and make it happen. SA PAC everywhere. And it's that type of grit that will refuse to have that door closed on you, to refuse knocking on that door. And if they don't open it, Molina, I know you're a small lady, but I know you got the legs to kick it in. And I've seen you do that. And many of us can continue to learn from you in that way. Yes, it's difficult to climb the ladder to the top in a society that has not become familiar and comfortable with others in that space, in this legal space. But do you have the grit required to make up the challenge? It will not be easy. We all know that. You need only ask Bevan Melvin and Brian Birrow of Jarama Legal, directors of Australia's first national majority-owned Indigenous law firm, a joint venture with Norton Rose Fulbright, or Tony McAvoy, SC, Australia's first and First Nations SC barrister. And I spoke about William Lai before. I mean, he's at VCAT as a top mediator. So on the surface, it looks like maybe these guys didn't, it looked easy. All of a sudden, you see this news is popping up, but the work that I've seen them put in, and the grit that they've put in for themselves, and the network that they built, unapologetically going out there and meeting the people that they set in their mind to meet. I think it is that grit that will move us and bring others behind us. These trailblazers that I've mentioned have already began to blaze the trail. We just need to continue to walk that same trail with that same grit.
Thank you, Donald, and thank you for your kind words. And I think this ties in very nicely with the theme for today, which is be the change we want to see. And that's exactly what you're asking us to do. I think it's all the more relevant as it was Mahatma Gandhi's birthday yesterday for us to have that theme as well. So be confident in yourself and your heritage. That's what I always think is really important. Talk about the positives, as I call it, your value proposition. If nothing else, economics makes sense to everyone. And don't be backwards in coming forward, and don't stand up to bullying. These were some of the messages given by Justice Kirby today as well. Be a joiner. And I think these are some of the takeaways from today's conference and some of our discussions that we've just had. Now, I think we've pretty much covered everything. We're running out of time now. What I will end by saying is that we want to collaborate with you guys, with all these organizations and other organizations that I know are working in the same space. We had a very good event at LIV last year, which NAALA actually initiated, and a lot of us joined, and we want to make it bigger. We want this collaboration to be meaningful. Maybe Blackboard is one way to go, maybe collecting data is another way to go. There's lots of ways to collaborate and support each other, and I look forward to some workshop coming out of this after this, and we can actually work on some concrete things. So thank you all for your time. It was a wonderful discussion, and see you soon in person. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Belinda. Take care.
Thank you.
See you all.
Thank you, guys.
Over to you, Anand.
Thanks very much, Molina, and thank you to you, Molina, for stepping in again at the last minute. What a wonderful spirit of collaboration. Listening particularly to Jazeer talk just a moment ago, saying what a wonderful thing it would be for us to be working together. And I really got that sense from that. So there's a lot to do there in the future, and a lot of good friendships, I think, as well to be made. So thanks very much again, Molina, and to the panel. I'm not sure like you, but it feels to me like we've actually been here all day. There's been so much discussion and a lot of good fun as well, which is quite unusual for a legal conference, but very refreshing, if I can say. It's my pleasure now to introduce the last two speakers who are going to kindly close the summit for us. And those two gentlemen are Kaey Soon. Kaey is the AALA New South Wales branch president. Kaey is a barrister at Frederick Jordan Chambers. Prior to coming to in a number of areas, his practice at the bar spans in courts and tribunals right across Australia, and he has experience in many areas, including commercial equity in corporations. I'm also delighted to mention our AALA's Victorian branch president, Daniel Nguyen. Daniel's actually at the Victorian bar, where he's established commercial and common law junior. Like Kaey, Daniel also has many areas of practice, but I can mention two: class actions and common law serious injury applications, and class actions coordinator at the Supreme Court of Victoria, where he worked with the Honourable Jack Forrest QC in the 2009 Black Saturday bushfire cases.
All right, I think we might just start off. I am going to start, and my learned friend, Daniel, will finish the proceedings. First things first, what I'll do is I'll thank the sponsors and the partners of the AALA and this particular event. So I'll just, hang on a second. If I could thank the official sponsors, the College of Law, Baker and McKenzie, and the Information Management Group, otherwise known as TIMG or Lit Support. These three sponsors have provided some genuine assistance to AALA to run this particular event. I'd also like to thank 5 industry support groups: the Australian Bar Association, the Queensland Law Society, the Law Society of South Australia, the Victorian Bar, and the Bar Association of Queensland. Again, without their support, this particular summit would not have occurred. What I might do very quickly before I pass on to my learned friend, and I will be quick, is try and distill what I picked up from the entire summit and everything which went through. I think it's a good way to summarize that 4 main sessions had a focus on what you can do personally, what can be done practically on a professional level, what can be done in terms of judicial appointments and their reflection in society, and finally, what we can do intersectionally amongst us. And I think what can be drawn out from all of these things is that there is a common thread, and that common thread is understanding. And I think what I'd suggest to everyone is go away and think about what increasing understanding of your place in the profession, everyone else's place in the profession, and where the profession could go will best inform how we deal with cultural diversity issues. What I would like to just say, just very quickly, is something which was said right at the beginning by Justice Kirby. And they were the 3 things which he said, which I think ring very true. 1, join things. 2, work hard. And 3, I think the most important part, and it was very generous of Mr. Kirby not to say that he may not have done this as early as he would have liked to. Speak your truth. I think if people speak their truth, even if it sounds confrontational, even if it sounds uncomfortable, even if it sounds like there will be a little bit of discomfort in that conversation, it needs to be done. And you may not even be right, but the fact that you've brought it up will only contribute to the ultimate advancement of cultural diversity in the profession. So if you speak your truth, I think that's one takeaway from this entire event we can really focus on. On that one note, since we're super late, I will pass on to my learned friend, Dan Nguyen.
Thank you, YK, and that encapsulation of the summit. Chung Choi Jit Philok, Chuk Ben Det, Chung Tu. I wish you all a happy Full Moon Festival for this past Thursday. On behalf of the AALA and our guests, I extend a heartfelt thanks to our distinguished and very esteemed speakers, and as I'm sure you'll agree, our very entertaining performers. It's been a privilege to hear from our speakers about their ideas around being a community leader and promoting diversity, access to justice as a cultural diversity goal, model for judicial appointments, and collaborating with diversity in the law. I want to congratulate and pass my thanks to the AALA Summit organisation team, especially Anand Shah, its chair, for an incredible effort for holding today's successful summit and offering such high quality speakers and content. I want to pass on a very warm thank you to our guests today, old and new to the AALA, who gave up their Saturday, and you've made this conference one to remember. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and inspiring. The next step for all of us is to use the ideas raised and discussed, and there are many from today, to positively impact cultural diversity in the law. As YK referred to, and Donald and Kingsley, be the change we want to see and speak your truth with grit. And the AALA will certainly continue doing that, and we'll be in touch with our members. If you're new to the AALA, I encourage you to join as a member at www.aala.org.au. Now let me introduce our last performance. Sudha Manian has trained from 9 years old in Indian classical music and dance by her gurus in India. She has performed at numerous shows across the country, including the International Jazz Festival in Brisbane, which is one of the finest sitar players, the sitar being a stringed instrument in the lute family. I now formally close what has been an excellent national AALA inaugural summit, and I invite you to enjoy an uplifting and joyful performance by Sudha Manian and her talented Yatra music group. Thank you all.